Chapter 50. Crossroad, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 50. Crossroad, 1, Chloe's parents were architects. Her father used to say that just like house is inhabited by people, it needs to be harmonious with nature. Chloe couldn't know the meaning of it, but her father's face while saying those words were really cool to her. Because the job of architect was like a dream for her, when for other children it was really boring. However, that dream didn't last long. Because the family she believed would last long, broke. Even if her parents could harmonize the house and nature, they couldn't do so for wife and husband. Even after Chloe could graduate from primary school, the loud voices of them finally brought up the divorce documentation. The custody of the child was taken by her mother, Diana Zhang, so Chloe Crook became Chloe Zhang since then. Diana was originally busy, but since then she got home really late. She didn't want her child to not live a normal life for being a child of a divorced family. That's why she let her do whatever she wanted, like martial arts, horse riding, swimming, karate, etc. Maybe it could be something Diana wished for. That her child was living soundly, and that she wanted to believe in that. However, Diana couldn't do the most important thing for her. To be next to her. Of course, the word homemade food could only get unfamiliar to her. Diana's cooking skills were great, and she used to cook with her on weekends. But it was difficult to take care of her even in weekdays. The reason Chloe got to cook well was also because of that. The things Chloe wanted to make were just too much, and she didn't want to keep eating things to fill her belly like pizza or hamburger. At times the internet, and at others she followed her mother's cooking method, and soon her cooking skills improved just like Diana. She had never dreamt of becoming a chef. Honestly speaking, it was hard to know if she wanted to become one right now. She just liked to cook. She participated in the competition with a light heart, and right now. It's heavy. On the bed. Chloe was mumbling, looking at the ceiling. In Chloe's head, many things passed by. Kaya, Jo Minjun, Hugo, etc. The common point those faces had was that they were filled with passion and determination towards cooking. Of course, Chloe too liked to cook. But if she was asked to bet all her life on it like them, she wouldn't be able to reply easily. That night she couldn't get to fall asleep. Chloe wore her sports clothes and went outside. To take a stroll in a moonlight night. Aside from it being weird, it was a dangerous thing. Because you didn't know what kind of people roamed at night. That's why Chloe took a stroll only around Grand Chef's house. It's still a bit scary. The wind was cold, and her surroundings was really secluded. It was because of that. The moment she saw the man that was seating in a bench, her face became bright. Minjun. You didn't go to sleep. Huh, what are you doing at this hour? You are also outside at this hour. Jo Minjun smiled and replied. Chloe slightly glanced at his handphone. On the screen that was shining brightly, many comments were written. But because it was in Korean, she couldn't read them. What are you looking at? The comments. If I see those I only feel bad, so I don't like reading them. I also don't like them because they makes me feel bad. Then why are you looking at them? Because it's human nature wanting to know the contents when someone curses you. Jo Minjun talked like that and shrugged his shoulders. Chloe let out a sigh. And you told that to Kaya? That it's a waste of time and attention. You seemed like a teacher lecturing your student. Kaya's still young. She would find it difficult to take it. And you are a grown-up. At Chloe's question, Jo Minjun replied with a smile. Chloe sat beside him and opened her mouth. I think that I'm still not a grown-up. I'm too young. What are you saying that so suddenly? Did the night make you susceptible? Just because. Chloe smiled lightly. Jo Minjun looked at her and then opened his mouth. You are troubled by something. There's nothing like that. You aren't troubled and you came out in this night. It's already 12. You are also outside. But I am troubled. Jo Min-jun talked like that and pointed his handphone with his finger. Chloe grabbed her forehead as if she had lost and continued saying. Yeah, good for you. I'm sorry. For not being troubled by a troublesome thing. What is it about? Jo Min-jun asked again in a serious voice. Chloe pouted her mouth and embraced her knees. It was cold. Just so, other people are living hard working, but it doesn't seem to be the case for me. You are working hard, so what's the problem? I'm not as passionate as you in cooking to cross the Pacific Ocean and come over here. Of course, it's the thing I like the most, and I'm liking it more and more, but I don't think that I'm on the level to challenge it like you. Because I'm wondering if I can bet my life in cooking forever. And what are you thinking to do if not cooking? I want to become a detective. I'm a fan of Holmes. Now that I see, you said that you were going to a law school. Jo Min-jun looked at Chloe as if he was surprised. Chloe wrapped her cheeks with both her hands. Or perhaps she was just cold. At that moment, Jo Min-jun thought about taking off his coat, but he didn't. They weren't in that kind of relationship. Jo Min-jun laughed and said. Having many abilities is also bothersome. Because you have many paths you can walk in. What if I have many paths? Because the most important thing is how much you bet in it. You have bet plenty already. There's no need to get anxious. Chloe shook her head slowly. What I'm troubled about is not that. Is if I can keep walking this path. I like your cooking. Although he said it quite bluntly, it had quite a feeling to it. Jo Min-jun continued talking. I think that your character is shown in your dishes. It's not excessive, it's gently and consideration overflows in it. The bad thoughts can't be seen in it at all. Even if I don't do bad things, I can be thinking about bad things. If you could look inside my head even you will be surprised. It's fine to think whatever you want in your head. The problem is if you show it or not with your actions. And the Chloe Zhang I have seen until now is timid but has some interesting sides, and if people point out the bad things of someone you tend to find the good ones. Hey, if you say it like that it's rather embarrassing. If you are like that, then would I be fine? If it was recorded for the broadcast I would be kicking my blankets forever. Ugh, I feel goosebumps. Jo Min-jun talked like that and extended his fingers. Chloe just stared at him. Her short hair fluttered because of the wind. My troubles are getting dispersed. And they aren't even getting solved. Actually, there are no solutions regardless of what you listen to. In the end, you have to walk by yourself to know the answer. And if you hesitate, Jo Min-jun put back his handphone on his pocket and got up. He pointed the strolling road and said. At least, I will walk this road with you. Oh Hyun-jun. It's really interesting for a Korean to appear in a foreign program. He's not even a resident overseas, but only a Korean. What's interesting in that? God Korea here are many cases like that. That's expanding in the world. Lee Jianian. At. God Korea my balls. In the end, it's that. They don't have that kind of opportunities in Korea so they go overseas. No reply. Kimbo. But he is having something with that white girl. If she was blonde I would die from a stomachache. Crow. You can dye your hair to become blonde stupid. TCH Kimbo. At Crow if you tan your skin do you become black? Shin Sayan. After I saw that I got hungry. By the way Grand Chef is really fun. It would be great if they come to Korea. Hello. That's that but your profile picture is really pretty. Is that you? JK Koo. Rather than those bluffs of a cooking it would be better to eat some fried chicken. Nope man. Nope JK Kyo. At Nope man it's my opinion so why are you against it? Nope man. Nope Wardo. It is, delicious. I see. A lewd weed. Help. Kim Yongchan. It would be fun if he wins it. A foreign guy would be taking all of the reward. Lee Ju-hee. But if he wins there, won't he nail down? If he gets prestigious over there, he won't have the need to come back to Korea. Kim Yongchan. At Lee Ju-hee you don't know about it. He may come back missing his hometown. But even if I see it, it would be better for him if he stays there. Nope man. At Kim Yongchan nope. Kim Cha Pepperman. It would be great if Kaya and Jo Min-jun end up together. Jo Min-jun stopped looking at the screen. Contrary of his worries, the reactions in Korea were quite good, and there were many people who mentioned about other things than himself. Honestly, he felt it to be regretful that the attention he received was low, but it was a rather good thing. Because he thought that the more attention you were given, there would be more bad things than good ones. Are they Koreans? Kaya, that was glancing at times, asked in a low voice. Jo Min-jun nodded. Kaya asked once again cautiously. Is there any word of me? Not much. Actually, she had a lot. However, it was all related to Jo Min-jun. It was a bit embarrassing to say that in front of her. She put on a relieved face. Jo Min-jun smiled bitterly and asked. Are you that worried? There's no one who likes being cursed. Then act a little softer while on the broadcast. Then, half of the antis would disappear. Enough. That wouldn't be me then. If you talk like that, I have nothing else to say. Jo Min-jun turned off his screen and lifted his head. Kitchen. The participants were all gathered. But it wasn't that they were gathered to eat as usual. Because the mission was soon going to start. The progression of the missions didn't have a fixed period. At times in 2 days, and in others, it was in 7 days. The judges and the directors had to set the schedule, so it was unavoidable, but even so, waiting without a schedule was always a bothersome thing. That's why the faces of the participants that were waiting for the judges to enter were a bit unburdened. Hugo, that was next to him, asked Jo Min-jun with a nervous face. What do you think the mission will be? I wonder. I think that all of the normal themes already got out. Wouldn't this be individual cooking? And they decide the cooking method and the ingredients for us. I would like to do something like Texas barbecue. You have to check on it for 24 hours straight. You want to do that? That's also true. Hugo admitted it clearly and shrugged his shoulders. At that moment, the door behind the kitchen started to slowly open. The participants gulped and looked at that. But something was different. There was a different point than usual. And it was the number of the judges. Precisely speaking, Joseph and Alan weren't there. The one coming in was only Emily. Emily coughed while standing on the stage and fixed her voice. The participants looked at her filled with curiousness, and Emily smiled in a good manner. Hello everyone. Even though I saw you in a long while, it doesn't seem that long. Emily looked at each of the participants and slowly smiled at them. When she looked at Jo Min-jun, she smiled even more brightly. But Jo Min-jun ignored her. After she had asked him to become an Epicurean, between them an awkward air was felt. It could be said that they felt uncomfortable between each other. But of course, in the first place they didn't even talk with each other. Today, you will have to choose between Alan and Joseph. I tell you beforehand, but this isn't a team mission. So when you choose, do it more seriously. You don't have to worry about who messes up the most. I tell you once again, this isn't a team mission. The moment he heard Emily's words, he could vaguely know the identity of the mission. He wondered if the participants they picked would vary according to the dish they chose beforehand, being one they liked and made well. And actually he did faintly remember seeing that mission. You will know the details after you choose. The ones who want to pick Alan go to the garden, and the ones for Joseph stay in this very place. I will give you exactly 1 minute. The participants didn't say a word and started to calculate in their heads. What kind of mission could it be? What side would be better to choose? And then, 1 minute passed. Emily shouted. Choose. Joe Minjun moved his feet. Crossroad, 1, End translator. Subac proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 51. Crossroad, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. Crossroad, 2, there was no need to hesitate. The moment he was given the two choices, Joe Minjun had already decided. Alan and Joseph were chefs with completely opposite nature. Joseph was basically a chef that took a serious importance in Orthodox cooking, and Alan was a chef that favored originality. But it wasn't that one side was better or worse than the other. Only, he got the feeling that if he went to Joseph, he would consider more the skills than the recipe. So it was better to go to the side where he could save the recipe's ability the most. Because Joe Minjun's best strength was the recipe designing of his system. Joe Minjun glanced at his sides. There were 7 others that were leaving the kitchen along with him. Kaya, Anderson, Hugo, Carlos, etc. Chloe and Marco still remained in the kitchen. The unexpected one was Anderson. Because Anderson's cooking and character was uptight and tenacious. Orthodox cooking suited him more rather than a challenging one. Joe Minjun thought like that. When he looked at Anderson while thinking like that, he didn't stop his feet and frowned. What? Why? Nothing. What is it? Don't make me curious and just spill it. It's really nothing much. I just found it interesting for you to have chosen Alan instead of Joseph. And why is that interesting? Just so. You usually cook orthodoxly. Anderson smiled and replied. If you can make an orthodox dish, you can make any. Right. Good for you. Joe Minjun shook his head as if he was tired of him. Anderson frowned while looking at Joe Minjun acting like that, but didn't say anything. Kaya that was looking at them clicked her tongue and said. Are you kids? I feel really weird listening to that from you. Because the most childish and spoiled one was her. She said with a blunt face. I'm still a teen. It's an age I don't need to act like a grown-up. Now that you say it like that, I get convinced. Joe Minjun nodded and smiled. Grand Chef's garden was the size of a considerable stadium. Joe Minjun moved his step with a more nervous face. Was his decision good? He didn't know. Not until he had experienced it. Alan was standing below a thick willow. In front of him was placed a table, and on top of it was a plate that was covered by a lid. Every time the wind blew and shook the branches, the sunlight made the shadow appear and disappear over Alan like a current of water. Rather than being romantic, it looked like a video that was playing in a screen with its pixels broken. There are 7 of you. There are more than I had expected. I thought that you wouldn't come for not liking me. Alan said with a voice you couldn't know if it was a joke or he was saying it seriously. Joe Minjun and of course, the participants looked at him with an awkward face. This was the time you could say that a strange distance was felt. Could it be said that his own words was deep, or he was in a 4D? Alan opened his mouth. What did you think would be the mission for you to come to me? Hugo. Answer me. To copy the signature menu of the chef, or for the chef to treat us to a dish he likes. I think that it will be one of the two. Well, if I have to pick one side, it would be closer to the latter. Alan talked like that and looked at them meaningfully. He slowly opened his mouth. I will ask you a question before announcing the theme of this mission. I will give you a last chance to go to Joseph. You aren't going to change. The participants just looked between themselves absent-mindedly, but there seemed to be no one to have changed their decision. Because, there was no meaning in changing even before you got to know what the mission was. Alan nodded. Good. Then, I will tell you the contents of the mission. Alan talked like that and opened the lid of the plate. And at that moment, a laugh was heard. And it came from Jo Min-jun. He looked at the contents of the plate hopelessly. It seemed to be made with loyalty to the basics rather than being fancy. He could see the sleek white rice grains, and the aroma that was felt was the smell of cheese along with the faint aroma of onion and leek. Risotto. Koreans tend to think that it's an Italian bibimbap, but actually, it was closer porridge than rice. In Italy this dish was treated as primo piatto along with pasta or ravioli. In parties, it was common for it to replace pasta, but normally, it was a dish that was eaten in a normal family meal. In Italy it was a dish that was as familiar and received as much love as pasta and pizza. Suddenly, Jo Min-jun became dubious. Was Alan Italian? Honestly speaking, he didn't care much about him, so he didn't know his birthplace. But fortunately, his doubt got resolved immediately. Alan served a spoonful of risotto in the 7 dishes and said, "I was born in Italy. It's obvious for pasta, and I also ate risotto as an everyday meal. That's why I can evaluate the flavor more accurately. You have to make a risotto taking into account the normal cooking method, and at the same time, satisfy my mouth. You can use whatever ingredient you want. Just, don't forget what a risotto is," Alan said in a strict voice. Jo Min-jun looked slightly at the faces of the other participants. 3 seemed really confident, and the other 3 did not. Anderson and Hugo were the ones who were confident. By the way, there was a time where Hugo made the Italian dish ossobuco in a perfect way. And when Jo Min-jun asked him the secret to it, there wasn't anything particular. Experience. His Italian grandmother made him many Italian dishes since small, and he said that he had made it several times. And he had also said that ossobuco was one of his specialties, so it being 8 points convinced him. If you group together cooking level and experience, a dish beyond your expectations comes. Honestly saying, he was envious. Jo Min-jun couldn't eat well-made dishes since small because of his mother's sloppy cooking skills. Lee Hyezian's food was always salty or needed seasoning, and there were many times where the cooking wasn't done properly. The problem Jo Min-jun had was that his cooking didn't have a foundation. He looked in the internet or broadcast and copied the recipe of the dishes that seemed delicious. He wasn't limited by boundaries, and the result of that was that he became able to cook all kinds of dishes. However, it couldn't be said that those dishes were his own. Because the food didn't have a color of Jo Min-jun, but was transparent and faint. He was troubled by it, but he couldn't do anything about it. The experience he had accumulated through his life, no, it was a problem of identity rather than experience. It was at that moment. Alan looked at Jo Min-jun and said, "Min-jun, you have showed us your absolute taste before. Can you guess all of the ingredients for this risotto?" He didn't expect that. But he understood. Because to just let that ability go to waste in a broadcast was really not a good thing to do. Jo Min-jun ate a bite of the risotto and slowly opened his mouth. The shallots and the onions are mixed on a 1:1 ratio. There is chopped garlic and the rice is arborio. Because it is an Italian dish, it would be good to use Italian rice. It's obvious, but there is salt, and also dry white wine. Jo Min-jun took the breath he was holding in. The participants were looking at him with an unknowable face. Jo Min-jun continued saying, "There's Parmigiano and Reggiano cheese in it. There's a little bit of pepper for seasoning, it's obvious for olive oil, and the gravy is a clam gravy. This seems to be everything." "Correct." Alan looked at him with a face he couldn't get accustomed to. At times, there were outstanding Epicureans that got all of the ingredients like Jo Min-jun. However, even they couldn't say those ingredients with absolute confidence. He differentiated the shallot and the onions. Those were ingredients you wouldn't know how to distinguish between them if you didn't know that they were included in the dish. Although if you ate knowing about it, it would be different. Weren't normal people not able to discern between Coke and soda? So he could only be expectant to Jo Min-jun's dish. A picture drawn by a colorblind and a normal person, and one drawn by someone who can see beyond color could only be different. Basically, it was because the world they saw was different. And he thought that Jo Min-jun's tasting world was different. He believed it to be like that. That if Jo Min-jun completed a flavor by his own, that flavor would be so luxurious and delicate as to not be able to compare it with anyone. The participants' sights became shameful. They knew that Jo Min-jun had a genius-like sense of taste, but that sight was one which they just couldn't get accustomed to. Anderson frowned and tried to feel all of the ingredients Jo Min-jun had named. But it was difficult. The flavor that was mixed time and time lost almost all of its original shape. How can he read all of those flavors like that? Aside from talent, he was envious. He got the feeling that Jo Min-jun's tasting world was more beautiful and happy world than theirs. But of course, in reality it was a bit different. Okay. Now that the little event has ended, we will go again with the main point. If you look at the ingredients Min-jun had named, there are no special ingredients in it. They are basic and normal ingredients. But that flavor is. It's a bit embarrassing to say it by myself, but I believe that you were satisfied by it. The participants nodded. Alan's risotto was so delicious it made them forget that they were in the middle of a mission. Alan continued speaking. The only I want to give is this. That a risotto must be like one. Don't put in your excessive greed. And if you keep all of that, I believe that an excellent risotto would appear. Risotto. Kaya mumbled in a low voice. Her voice that seemed like she was angry was telling that she was nervous right now. Because it was her character to erect her spikes when she got nervous. Even at first glance, Kaya was putting on a face that told that she didn't have much experience. And it was the same for Carlos. Their faces were so pale to the point that he felt bad for them. Am I making the same face right now? Jo Min-jun extended his hands and groped his face. But of course, there was no way he could know what kind of face he was putting right now. Alan opened his mouth. One of you, and one of the participants that followed Joseph will disqualify. But of course, if your dishes are so perfect to the point I can't disqualify you, today could become a day with no disqualifiers. I would also like for that day to come. Now, let's move. Taking into account that they had moved all the way to the garden, it was a really sloppy announcement of the mission. But of course, they would be shown through the screen like they were really nervous. Can you make risotto well? At the unexpected voice, Jo Min-jun turned his head. It was Kaya. Jo Min-jun shook his head and said. Honestly, it's not my specialty. But I will have to work hard. It seems like you don't have any specialties. Now that I think like that, it does seem like that. At her words, he let out a laugh as if he was a little relieved from the nervousness. But he seemed to be embarrassed to have laughed like that and forced himself to not laugh and said. Even so, your food is delicious. Was it? Yes. It is. Oh, wait. Let's stop. They will edit us once again. After she said that, she glared at the cameraman that was following from behind. As the cameraman laughed without noise and with a flustered face, she said while grumbling. You only get these things, right? The cameraman didn't reply. She wasn't expecting an answer, so she turned back with a cold face to look at Jo Min-jun. The cameraman grinned. Can that little lady know that her attitude is more charming in the screen? Crossroad, 2, End Translator. Subak Proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 52. Crossroad, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. Crossroad, 3, when they got back to the kitchen, it had the same awkward atmosphere as the garden. It could only be like that regardless of the mission. Because if it wasn't a mission which they were proficient in like steak, it was difficult for them. However, Joseph's theme had an easier point compared to Alan's. You are Paella? Jo Minjun asked with a hopeless face. Chloe nodded and replied. Yes. I was also surprised. I never thought that a Spanish dish would appear. After she talked like that, she let out a sigh. However, Jo Minjun was rather envious of her. Because at least, you could make paella without cheese. He did make risotto at times, but it didn't suit it that well. Maybe because it was a dish that was basically mixed with cheese. It wasn't that he didn't like it. He couldn't digest it well. Didn't he get a stomachache right before the preliminaries eating risotto? Even if he could make an edible risotto, he wasn't confident in making a perfect one. Because he couldn't even cook risotto al dente. Excluding expensive restaurants, they all served disastrous risottos. Maybe, it could be to suit their tastes, but the rice grains were usually fully cooked and crushed. Because he had lived eating those kinds of risottos, he couldn't get a model example of risotto. Even so, the reason he didn't feel despair was because he had the strength of the system. Because when he was designing the recipe, if there was an awkward point, it would be seen through the estimated score. The time to design the recipe was 10 minutes. Jo Minjun designed the recipe many times in his head. He put in sea mussel, bacon, and thought of many things that could go well with risotto. But it wasn't easy. They were mostly 5 points, and the ones he thought was good were only 6 points. Am I not doing the designing correctly? Or the score also takes into account how much I know about risotto, he felt frustrated. Because in the meantime he was thinking like that, the time was still flowing. But Jo Minjun wasn't the only one to be troubled about designing the menu. Kaya and Carlos were the same. Kaya didn't eat a risotto like risotto in her whole life. Precisely speaking, there was only once. Alan's risotto she had tried just now. Kaya just looked at the empty table in front of her. Actually, she was drawing the picture of herself making risotto in that place. She combined different ingredients, but she could only think of one recipe that was good enough. Only. Bring the ingredients. You have to complete your dish in 1 hour. There wasn't more time be thinking. Jo Minjun moved his step. It wasn't a perfect recipe, but he was attracted to one. It was a risotto made by using Italy's representing ham, prosciutto, and a ripe pear. The cheese he was going to use was the Parmigiano and Reggiano Alan had used. The meaning of the name was simple. Cheese from the region of Parma. This cheese originated in Italy. Parma was better known as Parmesan cheese in Korea. But were two completely different things. Parmesan cheese was a combination of Parmigiano, Reggiano and other things. Saying that the two of them were the same was like saying that pure gold was the same as mixed steel. And the rice was also the same as Alan's. Arborio rice. It was the most suitable rice when making risotto. This kind of rice was short in length, so the rice grains were hard and had great elasticity. It could be said that this ingredient had great synergy when combined with other ingredients. And the pear was Bosc pear. The Korean pear had a round shape like halabang, and compared to it, Bosc pear was more crunchy and had more sugar. That's why Jo Minjun wished for Korea to produce only Bosc pear. Because it was that delicious. Originally, if he had to check the ripeness of the fruit, he had to press the end part of the stem, and it took quite a while to do so. But Jo Minjun didn't have the need to do so. Because the system was telling him everything. Bosc pear, freshness. 94% origins. California quality. High, that was the best Jo Minjun could pick right now. Because even if it was immediately delivered, comparing to being acquired at that place, the freshness could comparatively fall. Jo Minjun's eyes moved quickly over the pears. He looked at over 20 windows and picked 2 Bosc pears, and then he picked the shallots and fresh sages. This herb that was also known as salvia was really strong. Saffron was also an attractive choice, but honestly speaking he wasn't confident in handling it perfectly. Because saffron was a really hard to handle herb. To use it in a non-accustomed to make dish like risotto, he couldn't help but hesitate. After he walked past the vegetable corner, Joe Minjun rolled his eyes in front of the place that contained the hams. Prosciutto ham. Prosciutto was also one of the products originating of Parma, just like Parmigiano and Reggiano. It was a ham made by drying sauced meat, and the special point was that it didn't need to be smoked. Just like you use dry aging method to dry the meat so the nutrients condense and the aroma intensifies instead of using the wet aging method, it was the same for prosciutto. But the point that wasn't comparable to dry aging is that prosciutto's maturing time was more than years. In the case of prosciutto, it was sealed in a plastic pack, so the quality was consistent. Joe Minjun grabbed a prosciutto without hesitation and kept walking. Chicken gravy, butter, dry white wine, and pepper was all of the ingredients he needed. He didn't need salt. He was planning to make the seasoning with just cheese. Joe Minjun was one of those that didn't take long picking an ingredient. Because the others had to check the quality of the ingredients one by one. Joe Minjun was the first to have finished picking his ingredients. He heated a small saucepan in mid-fire and the judges approached him. Joseph asked. You picked fresh ingredients well. What kind of risotto are you planning to make? It's a risotto made with pear, prosciutto and sage. The sage's aroma is strong, and it's also the same for prosciutto. Will you be able to make it as to those ingredients don't clash against each other? I'm planning to use the least amount of sage possible. If the dish is done as I'm thinking it to be, at least, it won't be thrown in the trash bin. The judges looked at him with envious eyes without saying anything. Joe Minjun didn't mind and concentrated on cooking. The estimated cooking score was 6. Although the recipe was good, it also meant that it lacked something. Actually, risotto was that kind of dish. Because rather than the recipe, the chef's hands could make a difference of heaven and earth. If you were a beginner, it was a dish which you would fail 100 times out of 100. And that's why Joe Minjun could concentrate harder than ever. Joe Minjun poured olive oil and heated it sufficiently. He couldn't let it smoke. Because that meant that the oil was burning. When it started to have a shiny gloss, it meant that it was already heated. Joe Minjun sliced the prosciutto thinly and placed it on the oil along with 4 leaves of sage. After waiting for it to become crispy, he had to take them out with a sieve and place it over kitchen towel to take off the oil. The next was the gravy. Joe Minjun poured the chicken gravy in a mid-sized saucepan and turned on the fire. It was a must to use an appropriate fire strength. B brought the gravy on fire and Joe Minjun placed the shallots and the prosciutto on a cutting board. It wasn't the prosciutto he had fried just then, but a new one. He chopped the same amount of prosciutto he had fried along with shallots, and he just had to fry it in the low-heated frying pan. Before the shallots turned brown from frying, there were many things he had to do in those 1 to 2 minutes. First, he had to take out the sage leaves for a bit, and had to peel the pear to chop it the size of a dice. As he was handling the pear and looking around, the onions were already finished cooking. Joe Minjun's hands fastened. And that was the reason. A voice was heard. Minjun. Look at your hands. Hands. It was Emily. Joe Minjun checked his surroundings dumbfoundedly. And only then did he notice that his left thumb had quite a deep wound. Joe Minjun raised his left arm. The medical crew quickly approached him and disinfected and sprayed hemostatic medicine in his thumb. Emily asked with a worried face. Can you continue? I will. Joe Minjun replied briefly and chopped the remaining pear with his other hand and put it on the frying pan. Pear, rice, and a teaspoon of sage. It wasn't frying but just coating it in oil while shaking the pan, and the next was the wine. After the treatment ended, he put on a rubber glove, and he poured half a cup of dry wine in the frying pan. His hand burned, but Joe Minjun was too concentrated to bother about that. He raised the fire of the pan that had the mixed ingredients, and Jo Min-jun just waited for the wine to boil down in the rice grains. And only then could he notice Emily that was still looking at him concerned. But she wasn't the only one. He didn't know when he had come, but Alan also approached him and was looking at his hands. Precisely speaking, at his left hand. Jo Min-jun looked down at his hand. Now that he was conscious of it, a hot and painful feeling made him frown. Alan and Emily could not tell him to stop and get a proper treatment. Because they knew really that for Jo Min-jun, and all the other participants, this place had a deep meaning. Jo Min-jun composed himself and said, "I'm okay. There's no need for you to be concerned. As soon as the mission ends, get proper treatment." Alan said in a blunt voice and turned his back. Emily too let a sigh and went to another table. Jo Min-jun bit his lips. The pain was getting worse, but it wasn't the time to be crying. The thumb, moving it is a bit difficult because of the pain, he couldn't feel it well. However, he was already done with the knife. The inconvenience wasn't that big of a problem. When the wine was almost boiled down in the rice, Jo Min-jun poured about half a cup of the boiling chicken gravy on the rice. When it boiled down, another cup. It boils down and another cup. And like that, 10 or 15 minutes passed and the rice grains were slowly becoming more sticky. And that was the time to put in the remaining pear. Jo Min-jun peeled off the pear, chopped it just like before and then put it on the pan. The pear slowly started to lose shape under the hot gravy and then disappeared. Jo Min-jun repeated tasting it. He felt the roundness of the rice grains, and also felt the faint aroma inside it. He couldn't exactly know what al dente meant, but he tried his best to give it flavor. It was through the taste his system couldn't do, but his tongue could. It was hard. The rice's flavor, pear's flavor, wine's flavor, gravy's flavor, sage's flavor. Feeling all of these flavors at the same time was a really difficult thing to do. However, Jo Min-jun was in a state of concentration like never before. It was an unfamiliar dish. And because of that, he had to evaluate it more perfectly. Jo Min-jun soon forgot about the pain in his thumb. He just felt the flavors. Flavor, aroma, texture. The only thing he was seeing right now was the risotto, and he was only listening to the rice grains exploding in his mouth. Jo Min-jun put all of his concentration in his tongue. No, precisely speaking, he wasn't concentrated in his tongue. Cooking. Jo Min-jun was immersed in cooking. No, the cooking embraced him. Even before he used all of the gravy, Jo Min-jun confirmed that the rice grains were completed. They were inflated like a balloon, and when he chewed the insides of it, his teeth felt the softness. The aroma of the wine and chicken gravy, and the aroma of the sage and prosciutto tickled his nose like an elaborated puzzle. Jo Min-jun turned off the fire, and started to cool the risotto. After a minute passed, he put in the melted butter, cheese and pepper to do the seasoning. It was completed. The estimated score was 6. Jo Min-jun bit his lips and stared at the risotto. The system was his strength. In the end, it didn't decide his limits. An excellent risotto. Although he had never eaten a proper risotto, in the end it was still food. A delicious one. And Jo Min-jun knew how to give it flavor. Just like Alan had said, he knew what cooking was. Although he didn't have the absolute sense of taste they thought he had. Jo Min-jun believed in his talent and passion for cooking. There's a saying that those who believe in themselves have no impossible things. At times, he thought that versicle was too idealistic and simple, but now he got the feeling he had comprehended those words. And that comprehension and trust compensated him. You made a risotto that's over your limits with a surprising concentration. The ingredients have perfectly harmonized themselves. The rice you made is taking all of that flavor. The mastery of Italian cuisine cooking has risen. Jo Min-jun's eyes shook. He looked at the last window with those shaking eyes. Pear risotto, freshness. 95% origins. Too many ingredients to show origins. High cooking score. 8/10 Crossroad, 3, End translator. Subac proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 54. Crossroad, 4, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. Crossroad, 4, 8 points. Joe Minjun looked at that score dumbfoundedly for a long while. He didn't believe it. He thought that it was difficult to do so until now. And it wasn't that he had made a dish you were familiar with like Hugo. He wasn't familiar to, and didn't even like risotto. He got 8 points with that risotto. It would be a weird thing if that situation made him only happy. Of course, his heart felt like exploding for the score he had received for the first time in his life, but at the same time, he felt dubious. How in the world could he get 8 points? Was concentration alone enough to do that? Well, everybody take your hands off. Even before he could organize his thoughts, Joseph yelled. Of course, there was no one to have failed in completing their dish after 1 hour. Because 1 hour was enough to make risotto and paella. As he slowly checked at his surroundings, his eyes fell on Kaya's dish. He couldn't help it. Because he knew that she was showing a not confident attitude. But because of that, he couldn't help but wonder. Cooking score 8. He understood that. But shallots and onions on a 1.1 ratio, Parmigiano and Reggiano, clam gravy, dry white wine. This is exactly the same as Alan's. The dish Alan had served them just then was copied exactly the same in front of Kaya. Did she originally cook it like this? He didn't remember well. Looking that it was 8 points means that she was successful in bringing out the same flavor. But can she get through the creativity? Is not a problem that can get solved for me to worry about. Joe Minjun looked away. He had made an 8 points dish for the first time in his life. It could be a selfish thing to say, but he wanted to enjoy this miracle to his heart's contents instead of worrying of something that didn't even happen. The first ones the judges evaluated were Carlos and Marco. Both of them weren't able to make outstanding dishes. Because Carlos and Marco were 6 points. Joe Minjun quickly looked at the dishes of all of the participants. And there was only one 5 points dish. Coney. From the remaining participants, she was the only one around her 40s, and was also the most silent participant. What she had made was paella with corns and onion, but honestly even at first glance, it didn't seem that delicious. He thought that the one to disqualify would be Coney, if there were no upsets. However, it was uncertain for the risotto team. 7 points for Anderson and Hugo. Kaya was 8 points. And the remaining 3 were all 6 points. You wouldn't know who of those 3 would disqualify. Alan ate a bite of Carlos's risotto and rinsed his mouth with water. Then opened his mouth. Carlos. What's the theme of this risotto? I saved the aroma with basil and pine nuts. No, I can see that clearly. But why am I chewing more pine nuts than rice grains? The seasoning is good. And it's the same for the recipe. But the oil of the pine nut is covering all of the flavor. Have you tried it? No, I just didn't have the leisure to. Are you saying that you made risotto without even trying it? Do you know that much about risotto? Carlos lowered his head. And the evaluations that continued from Joseph and Emily weren't that different. It was averagely good, but the problem was that the pine nuts covered the risotto's flavor. In the end, Carlos became a disqualifying candidate and went back to his countertop. And Marco also received a bad evaluation. He made paella that was fried with lemon juice along with a hard baguette, shrimps and saffron. However, the fish gravy was weak and was a bit burnt, so in the end he also got to the disqualifying candidates. After that was Kaya and Coney. The moment the judges looked at Coney's paella, they showed hesitation, but couldn't help but to lift their spoon and eat a bite. And then frowned. Emily let out a deep sigh and said. You are aware that it is overcooked, right? Yes. There are a lot of things that are lacking for it to be called paella. The rice grains are damp like cheese, and because of that, I get the feeling that the flavor of the other ingredients are also sloppy. Connie. Right now, you are the most convincing disqualifying candidate. After that was Kaya. After Alan ate a bite of Kaya's risotto, he said with a casual voice. Before, when you were preparing to cook, I asked you if you were planning to imitate my dish. Actually, I said that half joking, but you really did so. I told you before, that the risotto I ate before was the only time I have tried it. If you say it like that, I feel sorry for telling you something, but even so I need to say what I have to. Didn't you think about reforming a little bit of the basics of my dish? Are you able to run before walking? That was the most indirect way Kaya could say. Joseph just chewed Kaya's risotto without saying anything, and said with a soft voice as usual. Just like Alan had said, maybe it lacks creativity. Because it's the same as copying another person's dish. Alan should have thought that copying his recipe was the best you could make. Is that right? I already told you. That walking is my utmost. You are right. Alan. I think like that. That it's a bad thing for a chef to test a customer with creativity that isn't even theirs. Emily nodded and said. Actually, how many participants could there be that had used their own recipes? In the first place, this isn't even that kind of program. You aren't cooking what the others had already cooked, but the theme is to cook a delicious thing. I agree on the point that she had made the best she could. Of course, her lack of understanding towards risotto can be a diminutive point, but at least, it seems that she had done her best in her own environment. Alan didn't refute the words of the two. Because he thought that there was some truth behind their words. The judges sent eye signals between themselves. Alan nodded and opened his mouth. Kaya. We think that we want to keep watching your cooking. It's a bit disappointing that in today's dish, there wasn't a trace of your color, but it was still good. You have expressed it completely like I had thought. You pass. Thank you. Kaya turned back with a not happy nor disappointed face. And after that, it was the turn of Zhou Minjun. Precisely speaking, Zhou Minjun and Chloe's turn. Zhou Minjun glanced at her dish. Sea mussel and shrimp was appropriately placed on top of the sea mussel's shell, so it seemed all the more luxurious. But of course, peeling off sea mussel was realistically more burdensome to do. 7 points. It wasn't a bad score. At least, she could survive today. After he thought like that, his head got filled to the evaluation he was going to hear. It was his best work in all his life. So it was obvious for him to be expecting what kind of evaluation he would receive. The first one to be evaluated was Zhou Minjun. Zhou Minjun couldn't help smiling little by little. Alan glanced at the dish and opened his mouth. You said that you weren't familiar to risotto, do you think that you had made it well? Yes. I affirm it more than any time. Those confident words made Alan momentarily flinch. Alan raised his head and looked at Zhou Minjun. A voice was heard. Not from Alan, but from Emily. Minjun. Last time you said that you had a scoring system. Was that called cooking score? So, what kind of score would you put to your dish? If you are confident, maybe a 7. There were rumors in Grand Chef's house that Zhou Minjun scored a dish, and that he had said that his best was making a 7 points dish. Looking at Zhou Minjun's confidence, there was nothing wrong to say that his dish was a 7 point. But the weird thing was after that. Zhou Minjun replied while smiling brightly. Number 8 points. 8 points. Didn't you say that it was difficult with your current strength? I wonder. Maybe the word miracle is used at times like this. Zhou Minjun's words were better than usual, it wasn't with the meaning to use as broadcast material. The judges, the participants, and the casting crew that were looking at him all felt that. Joseph put the risotto in his mouth as if he couldn't take it more. He closed his eyes trying to feel the grains of rice one by one, and soon, the same smile as Jo Min-jun was seen in his face. I understand those words. The happiness contained in those short words were really dense. Alan and Emily hurried to lift their spoon and ate the risotto. And at that moment, they could understand Joseph's words. Pear risotto. Actually, it wasn't a special recipe. The combination of prosciutto and pear was used by commoners a lot, and using sage leaves wasn't all that special either. Because it was a herb used frequently in risotto. However, the depth of the flavor wasn't ordinary. Because even if it was the same recipe, according to the amount of dedication you put in and invest time and effort, the flavor would get different. Cooking was about that. Cooking didn't betray the time invested. Luxurious dishes taking a long time to make wasn't a coincidence either. And from Jo Min-jun's pear risotto, that dedication and time was felt clearly. The ingredients were exquisitely harmonious with each other, as if trying to not ruin the flavor even a little, and through the teeth the texture of rice grains that were chewed and the flavor of the gravy and wine were perfect beyond asking. Alan opened his mouth. It was a voice filled with satisfaction. How did you make this kind of risotto? Min-jun. This risotto kind of risotto shouldn't be able to be made by someone who doesn't know about risotto. Just say about seasoning, because that's entirely up to tasting. Someone like you should be able to catch that easily. However, it isn't for the rice. It shouldn't be easy to boil down the gravy this exquisitely. I won't entirely say that it was all because of my skills. I'm thinking that I was really lucky back then. But just because of that, it didn't change the fact that it was a good dish. Even if it was by coincidence, they felt good for having seen his potential. Joseph nodded and said. Miracle comes to those who are ready for it. Min-jun. It's your luck and skills. Congratulations. If it's 8 points, it means that it's the first time you have climbed your wall. The wall you have climbed once, will be easier to do so the other times. Thank you. I would like it if it's like that. Jo Min-jun smiled and replied. Alan slightly glanced at the other judges. However, there was no need to ask them their opinions. Jo Min-jun had already said that his dish was 8 points. And the judges agreed to that. It was the best this he had made so far. Alan opened his mouth. Min-jun. People are focused about your tasting right now. I also was like that. However, an excellent chef is not always an excellent Epicurean. Even if you didn't have that sense of taste of yours, you should have still made an excellent dish. Because you are a person that can pour all of the attention in one risotto. That concentration will become your weapon. I agree fully with Alan. Min-jun. If you place this risotto in any restaurant, it would never get a complaint. You are calling this moment to be a miracle, but if you keep working like this, I believe that your everyday will be filled with these kinds of miracles. I ate well. Emily continued to say after Alan. She was putting on a really big smile, maybe because of the risotto she had ate. Alan coughed and opened his mouth. Go and treat your hand first, Min-jun. Did I pass? The answer is on the plate. Alan lifted his finger and pointed the plate. Risotto, no, the plate that contained the risotto. It was a really clean one. Crossroad, 4, End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 54. Crossroad, 5, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. Crossroad, 5, while he was getting treated, Chloe's evaluation was proceeding. There were no upsets. Although there weren't compliments, there also weren't critics. Looking at the face of Chloe that was returning, Jo Min-jun frowned. But of course, it wasn't because of the results of her evaluation. His pain was getting worse. The doctor applied an anesthesia through a syringe and said in a blunt voice. As time passes, your sense will awaken, and the pain will get worse. How long will it take to heal? It's different to each person, but normally it will take around 1 week for the scar to close. And in 2 weeks, it will completely heal. It will take even longer for the sensation of your finger to completely come back. The doctor talked like that and sewed his thumb with a thread. There were 5 stitches. The injury on a hand for a chef was no different than a company for life, but even so, looking at the needle sewing through his flesh, he felt somewhat uncomfortable. Don't look. It's not good for your mental health. As he turned his head to look at the judges because of what the doctor had said, Hugo was getting his evaluation last. 7 points. It was the same with the ossobuco, but he thought that Hugo was a relatively skillful chef. He thought that if he went on like this, he would reach level 7 in cooking in a few years. Thanks for your good cooking. With Emily's last words, the evaluation ended. The judges glanced at Zhou Minjun. The final conclusion had to be done when all the participants were gathered. The doctor tapped Zhou Minjun's wrist and said that the treatment was done. As he went back to his countertop, Joseph opened his mouth. We have decided the first place for today's mission as the results of sharing our opinions. First, I'll tell you what kind of dish got first place. Risotto. It is risotto. At those words, Zhou Minjun licked his lips and looked at the judges. There were only 8 points dishes today. Him and Kaya. However, in the case of Kaya, she received a critic about her creativity, while he didn't get any. So of course, he could only expect to it. Joseph looked at Zhou Minjun. He raised his hand and made a gesture as to get closer. Minjun. Congratulations. You are today's protagonist. He couldn't control his expression. The smile made his lips to raise, and he tried his best to shut his mouth. However, that result ended in being a bright smile. It was the first time. 8 points, and being first. He had always tried his best to survive, but there wasn't a day where he became the best. However, it was just like Joseph had said. He was today's protagonist. Joseph continued speaking. Get some confidence. Minjun. Regardless of that absolute sense taste, you are already an excellent chef. If you improve your risotto a bit, it can even be presented on my restaurant's table. It was that kind of dish. In my opinion, it seems that you have always doubted about your own skills. Saying that the best you could make was a 7 points dish is proof of that. Why are you thinking like that? Think about the risotto you made. Didn't you say it yourself? That it was an 8 points dish. Stop doubting in yourself. After Joseph talked, Alan's words made Zhou Minjun not able to reply back. He couldn't just say that because the system said that his cooking level was 6, he could only make a 7 points dish at best. It wasn't because he had to keep it a secret. Whatever it was, in the end it was evident that Zhou Minjun had surpassed his own limits. He felt his throat choke and that something was surging up. That was resentment, happiness, sadness surging through his throat and made him want to shed tears. He planned to not cry until he had won, but he raised his hands to cover his eyes. Beyond his palms, a voice was heard. Cook like today. I believe that you being the best won't end today. Because the 20s is a good age to grow. Thank you. His voice was wet. Although it would be seen good in the screen, Zhou Minjun was rather embarrassed of his own voice. He felt that he wasn't manly or old enough. But it just couldn't be helped. Because the dream he had always wanted approached right in front of him and was saying that he could get it. If in that kind of situation, you didn't get a surge of emotions, there were 2 reasons for it. That the dream was a fake one in the first place, or he had never felt moved. As he stopped shedding tears and moved away his hands, in his cloudy sight, Alan was also looking at him with a moved expression. Zhou Minjun tried to make up a smile and bent down to the judges. It was a Korean salute, but even so, he wanted to express himself. As the announcement of the first place ended, after that came what made everyone bothered. The announcement of the disqualifiers. Even the judges couldn't get used to that moment. Alan said with a hard voice. We ate many dishes today. In the case of risotto, we had our opinions collide a little, but in the case of paella the disqualifiers were too clear to see. Carlos. Connie. Come to the front. Carlos walked to the front with a pale face. Connie had a calm face as if she had already expected it. Alan said in a cold voice. Connie. You have made the most terrible dish until now. Did you know that? Yes, I do. However, it doesn't mean that you are also a terrible chef. I have eaten well the dishes you have prepared until now. The dream to become a chef, I wish you don't give up. You have potential. Just keep going like this. Yes. Connie replied as she nodded. After that, was the turn of Carlos. Carlos was nervous because of the soon-to-reach announcement and was tensing his muscles. The tattoos on his arm wriggled, but it just seemed like a weak cat with its fur erected. Emily opened her mouth. Actually, we have thought a lot picking you. Saying the truth, there were many participants who had made risotto in your level. However, a disqualifier had to appear. And from those, we picked the chef we got the least amount of impression. I'm sorry, Carlos. It seems that you are done until here. Connie, Carlos. Leave your Grand Chef badges and leave please. Carlos and Connie pulled out the badges with their hands trembling. They left the badges in the table they had just cooked until now, and they could only leave the kitchen with strengthless steps. Joe Minjun bit his lips and looked at Carlos's back. He couldn't say that they were close, but it was the first time a participant he was rather close to and had shared conversations with to disqualify. They cooked together for the same dream, but in front of the crossroad they had to separate. Actually, this competition could be called as a constant crossroad. Because every time the broadcast ended, at least one participant disqualified. If in the start you felt a strong feeling to survive, now it was at the point you had to compete with each other without yielding. It was bitter. So much that the sweet taste of victory dispersed. As the interview with Martin ended and night approached, the participants were gathered in the hall as usual. It was time for the broadcast to start. Although there were 2 disqualifiers, it wasn't right for them to keep being sad. Because even if they weren't in this program anymore, it didn't mean that their dreams were ruined. Joe Minjun massaged Hugo's shoulders strongly. Hugo got surprised and looked back at him. You would be feeling lonely for your best friend to have disappeared. Phew, I don't know. Hugo let out a sigh as he shook his head. Just as much as he was close to Carlos, regret was as big as that. The broadcast started. Just like irony, the first one to appear in the screen was Connie. She was looking at the camera with resolute eyes. I'm an unmarried mother. My kid just became 4 and is going to kindergarten. And I'm in debt not being able to even pay the kindergarten. The talent I have. No. I don't know if I'm able to call this as talent. It's my last rope. I'm doing it because I like. I wonder. Honestly saying, I feel more pressured than feeling fun in cooking. Because it's my last hope. Because of a stable life of my child and I can't fall here. I will win. Surely. I'm not as knowledgeable about cooking like the other participants, and I have just learned through going to all kinds of kitchens. But my reason to win is clearer than all of them. It was a heavy content. The people that tried to keep a bright attitude were sulking. If you were a normal viewer, you would cheer looking at that scene, but they already knew. That Connie had disqualified. That bastard of paella. Joe Minjun let out a sigh inwardly. Honestly speaking, even if Connie got through this mission, there was no way she could win. Because there was a basic difference in skills. But even so, he couldn't stop feeling bad for her. The broadcast was about the 3-course. Jo Min-jun could look at that situation in detail for the first time. Precisely speaking, it was Anderson's and Kaya's fight. They, who were arguing about who was going to be the main, in the end, a mosaic was put in Kaya's hand and then ended. Joanne hit Anderson's arm and said, "Do you want to beat a kid? Shut up. You two are similar." At her words, Kaya, that was far away, frowned and glared at her. Joanne raised both of her hands as if she was surrendering. And after that, it was just as they had known. No, there was one thing he didn't notice. And that was that the other teammate of Kaya and Anderson was Carlos. Anderson's team disqualified, and in the losers revival phase, Kaya asked for help to Jo Min-jun, and then the commercials came. Now, the participants didn't bother them about their love line. Because they have already teased them sufficiently. Although it would be different for the viewers. You won't be able to sleep tonight too, checking the comments. Hugo smiled and said that. Jo Min-jun looked at him and asked. You don't check it? I read a little. Even if I read it, there's nothing I can say. And there isn't much about me. Because I haven't been put in a love line from the director like certain someone. Be thankful that you weren't. Because this is really stressful. And why do you get stressed? It wasn't Hugo who had asked the question. Jo Min-jun turned his head. Kaya was looking at him with a puzzled expression. You also check the comments because you get stressed. Isn't it? I do get stressed, but not because of that. If you get grouped with me, it's an honor. Why is that stress? You shouldn't get between a married couple's fight. I'm out. Enough. Sit. What couple are you saying? Jo Min-jun made Hugo, that was about to leave, to sit. Hugo glanced a little and whispered lowly in Jo Min-jun's ear. I'm afraid of her. Nowadays teens are all like that. I don't think I was like that. You were a teen a long time ago. How old were you? 28, Cook. Hugo put a depressed face and dropped his head. At the sight of them playing by themselves, Kaya wanted to say something more, but in the end she didn't. The broadcast was starting again. It was about their personal stories. They showed the story of every participant and told the reason why they couldn't disqualify, and it was also the same in case of Kaya. I'm not planning to return to that kind of a sewer. Well, the other participants should have similar reasons. A reason to not disqualify. But, I'm sorry, but it's unavoidable. Because I also have a reason. I'm going to win even if I have to kill them all. It was really extreme, but nobody blamed her. Because they now knew well about her character. But of course, it would be different for the viewers. He glanced at Kaya and saw that she was putting a quite serious face. It was at that moment. It seemed that Carlos was also at the disqualifiers revival phase, but they showed him cooking, and on top of that, his voice covered it. Actually, in the past, I used to do drugs. And the way to get out of that was through cooking. It's the truth. I'm not saying it for the emotional parts, but I really only had cooking. The only thing I could concentrate and have fun. Aside from drugs. I only had cooking. Perhaps, cooking could have been a drug for me. And I'm planning to win everything with this drug, like cooking. Reality, and prohibition syndrome. All of it. Voices were heard among the participants. Nobody knew that Carlos used to do drugs. And it seemed to be the same for Hugo, because he had quite a serious face. Jo Min-jun patted Hugo's shoulder lightly. It's going to be fine. Although he got eliminated, cooking didn't leave him. It will, right? It will. He was a good guy. Let's believe in him. Hugo laughed bitterly and looked again at the screen. The broadcast continued running and soon was announcing the disqualifiers and the winners. Looking at the Grand Chef's logo widening and filling the screen, Jo Min-jun felt the broadcast to be too cruel. This broadcast's victory was a sweeter mistake than anything else. However, this mistake was only allowed to one person. Aside from that person, all the remaining ones will end up in a failure. The disqualification and trials of the participants would give the viewers a stirring emotion that amounted to only a tear, but for the concerned party, they embraced them a suffering that made them feel about to crumble. What would be in the end of that crossroad? Cheers. Or Crossroad, 5, End Translator. Subac Proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 55. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 1, as he looked outside the window, many sceneries flowed slowly. Inside the shaking bus, Joe Minjun stared at the horizon absent-mindedly. Now that he thought about it, it was impossible to experience looking at the horizon with his own eyes in Korea. Because the word horizon didn't really suit with Korea. The only place you could properly see the horizon in Korea was Gimje. But of course, he had never traveled to the south to just look at that. What's there to look that you are looking like that? It's different to look at the horizon in Korea. What? Why? There are many buildings and many mountains. No, you are just unable to look because of the many mountains. Anderson was putting a face as if he didn't understand. Joe Minjun shook his hands and said, people from big countries like you wouldn't be able to understand. I didn't particularly say that I wanted to. Anderson grumbled and turned his head. Hugo that was seated behind them smiled and said, do you fight every time you meet? This isn't called fighting. I wonder. In my eyes, it seems like it. Looking at him smiling seemed like even if they told him something, he was still going to say what he wanted to. Joe Minjun didn't reply and looked again outside the window. It wasn't even a grassland, but the wild. And this wilderness was so vast it made you feel fresh. The reason they got in the bus like this was simple. After the mission of the risotto and paella ended and after 2 days passed, Martin summoned them. There was only one sentence he had said. We will move to the next mission place. Many questions poured at him, but there was no reply. So of course, the bus could only be filled with curiousness and frustration. Kaya grumbled while playing Tetris in her handphone. Martin needs to suffer once to wake up. We hide his salary envelope in a secret place of his house and when he asks where it is we reply, it's that place you think it is. It's good. But nowadays, they don't give you in cash. They deposit it directly to your bankbook. Then we just have to hide his bankbook and cards. Enjoying hide and seek with Martin. Just like that. Everyone laughed. Marco laughed awkwardly and opened his mouth. But really, where could we be going to? Looking at the past season, they did things like distributing food to all the soldiers. There was also that time when they sailed to the sea. And cooked with the fish they had caught. Joe Minjun just smiled without saying anything. He remembered well where they were heading to. Because it was that fun of an episode. If it wasn't different to the original, the place they were heading to. He opened his mouth. It's a bit boring to just go like this, wanna bet? Bet. How? We each bet the place we think we are going to, and the ones who gets it wrong must pay the price to the one who won. Washing the dishes, or making food. If not, a temporary errand coupon would also be good. Then let's do it like this. The person who gets it right becomes king for a whole day. And if that person orders it we have to listen to him or her. How about it? That's fine. At Hugo's words, Joe Minjun nodded. Hugo looked at his surroundings seeming to be having more fun. Who wants to participate? No. Who doesn't want to? There were only 2 people who had raised their hands. Anderson, and Kaya. Hugo opened his mouth regretting it a little. Hey, you are the ones we want to make you work the hardest, so how can you get out? It's just like you said. If I lose, it seems like you are going to drain everything out of me. You just need to win. Kaya raised her finger without saying anything. Of course, it wasn't the thumb. Nor the index, ring or pinky finger. Hugo put on an astringent face and looked back at Anderson. Anderson. Why aren't you playing? Don't bother me and play among yourselves. I'm going to sleep. Anderson just closed his eyes as if he didn't even want to reply anymore. Hugo let out a sigh and turned his head. And he looked at the other participants and said. Okay. Where do you think we are going to? I'm betting in the army. The hotel. Hotel seems fine. Hotel for me too. Restaurant for me. A family's house. Aside from them, many guesses poured. Hugo wrote the names and the places on his handphone. And he glanced at Zhou Minjun and asked. Minjun. Where? Rent car. What? What are you saying so suddenly? Hugo looked at him as if it was absurd. Rent car and cooking. It was a combination that didn't suit each other at all. Even if he looked at him as if he wanted to purposefully make it funnier, Zhou Minjun was just smiling brightly. Hugo frowned and said. There's no backing down later. This crazy. Hugo looked in front and said absent-mindedly. The thing that welcomed them when they got down of the bus was a signboard that said, Rent car. We will become your feet. Hugo turned his head as if he couldn't believe it. Martin was getting down in a mid-size Jeep car. Hugo asked. Rent car. Are we maybe making the food for the employees here? Maybe. Wait a moment. You will soon see the mission. It was at that moment when Martin ended talking. From the parking lot, a loud sound rang and soon, 3 cars entered. Those were trucks. Food trucks. Only then could Hugo understand the relation of rent car and cooking. Zhou Minjun laughed and held Hugo's shoulder. When should we do the king thing? Did you expect this? If I didn't, there was no way, I replied as rent car. Are you extraordinary or do you bet real money? Hugo said with a strengthless voice. It was at that moment. The people that were getting down the food trucks were all familiar people. They were the judges. Zhou Minjun let out a laugh and looked at them. Emily sighed as if she was a bit nervous. It's really difficult driving a truck. You drive well, Emily. Don't make fun of me. Emily shook her head with a worn-out face at Alan's words. Alan smirked and looked at the participants. He opened his mouth. Actually, showing you this much, you should be able to know the theme of this mission. Yes. This is a food truck mission. Zhou Minjun looked at the truck with a smile. It was a size 15 people seemed able to get in. Actually, Zhou Minjun had a desire about this kind of mission. Precisely speaking, he wanted to feel getting in a food truck to travel everywhere and use the ingredients to feed the residents from all the places. With that kind of meaning, Zhou Minjun felt this mission to be a reward for him. However, the real reward hadn't started yet. Joseph looked at Zhou Minjun and said. There are 3 trucks. So of course, there will be 3 teams. And the team leaders would also be 3. And one of the team leaders shall be the person who got first place in the last mission. Minjun. Come to the front. At the unexpected act, Zhou Minjun walked to the front with a confused face. To be a team leader. He couldn't even imagine that the day he would have that role would come. He could only get perplexed. Joseph continued speaking. There are currently 13 survivors. It's a number that can't be divided exactly by 3. So naturally, there will be a team with 5 people in it. And Minjun, that will be your team. Is that a good thing? Normally it would. Because you would get 1 hand, no, 2 more hands. Joseph talked like that and laughed. And then looked at the participants. And I will pick 2 more team leaders among you. It's not only the last mission, but they are the people who had showed to be the most suitable to be team leader. Chloe. Hugo. Come to the front. Chloe and Hugo walked hurriedly to the front with a surprised face. Looking at their blushed cheeks for being nervous, Emily said in a teasing manner. You aren't blushing because you are angry, right? Yes. Yes. Of course. Chloe got surprised and shook her hands. Alan said in a calm voice. After you make your teams, you will have to make business traveling the zone for 1 week. You are free to choose what you will sell. The evaluation is simple. I will compare the ranking of you guys. To the team that got first place, they will be given a coupon to eat in a luxurious restaurant, and to the last place team, a disqualifying mission will be given. There are no rewards or punishments to the second place. 1 week, everyone mumbled with an absent-minded voice. It was longer than they had thought. However, it wasn't that bad. They thought that they would be having fun for 1 whole week. But of course, their bodies would get exhausted. Because when you did something you liked, even if your body found it hard it couldn't fight back. The basic funds will be supplied by us. It's your choice to sell good ingredients expensive, or use cheap ingredients to sell it cheap. Then, let's make the teams. Minjun. I will give you the right to choose first. Who will you pick? By the way, they can't deny you. At those words, Joe Minjun slowly looked at the participants. There were 3 that got his attention. Kaya, Anderson, and Marco. First, Joe Minjun excluded Marco. His baking skills were certainly outstanding, but the combination with food truck wasn't that good. Because he couldn't be baking bread inside the truck. The remaining ones were Kaya and Anderson. Actually, he would be picking Kaya based on his feelings. Because he was her fan, and was close to her. On the other hand, he and Anderson were always quarreling. They weren't in bad terms but it couldn't be said that they were in good terms either. However, there were 2 uncertain things to just pick by skill. First, the temperament. For the temperament, he thought that the both of them wouldn't be able to treat the customers well. No, maybe Kaya would be better off. Because she grew up in the market. She wouldn't be frowning next to her mother while she was selling fruit. In the case of Anderson, compared to Kaya, the good point he had was the vast knowledge about luxurious cooking. Especially, in the case of culture, Anderson was many times higher than Kaya. On the other hand, Kaya had learned many things thanks to jumping through the boundaries. Perhaps, she was similar to Joe Minjun in that aspect. In that moment, he remembered Kaya calling his name in the previous mission. However, this wasn't the time to be shaken by friendship. Anderson. Let's go together. There was no better participant than Anderson in this kind of mission, where you didn't know the direction it would go to. Because wherever you placed him, he could complete his role without any problems. On top of that, he didn't really like the fact that people were thinking that they were dating. Anderson nodded without saying anything and stood in front of him. Joe Minjun slightly glanced at Kaya, but turned his head because he flinched. Kaya was putting on a really scary face right now. The next was Chloe. She didn't hesitate even a moment and opened her mouth. Kaya. Please come. And Hugo picked Marco. After each of them named 3 teammates, the remaining one was Peter that just like irony he had caused trouble in the last mission. After that, people tended to consider him as a participant without skills. Peter went to Joe Minjun with an awkward face. As the last member, the only place he could go to was Joe Minjun's team that was possible to form a 5-man team. And the teams conformed like that. Joe Minjun's team was like this. Joe Minjun, Anderson, Ivana, Joanne, and Peter. Alan clapped and opened his mouth. Good. You will have to get along like this for 1 week. The fees you use in the middle will all be up to you. It will be important to calculate the sales amount and the traveling distance. The customers and place. You have to grasp all of that. The only thing I tell you is that you are forbidden to do business in the same place for more than 2 days. Keep roaming. It's your work to design food that will suit the location. Joseph added. Listening to that, Jo Minjun felt that this was a rather difficult mission. Because you had to do business, and not only cook. There were more things to think than usual. And the one who was responsible of it all was the team leader. At that moment, he felt that reality more clearly. Traveling, cooking and business, 1, End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 56. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 2, the judges didn't waste more time and left the place. Jo Minjun laughed lightly and looked at his teammates. She made eye contact with Kaya that wasn't on his team, but as soon as they saw each other she turned her head. Was she angry? Anderson that followed Jo Minjun's sight asked as if he was teasing him. Why? Do you regret it? No, it's not that I'm regretting it. I just feel a chill down my spine. Then why did you pick me? So not like you. Just make your love line as usual. I picked you because I also didn't like that. Because we would get more tired the more they see us together. You are talking like you have nothing going on between you. Because we don't. Jo Minjun said with a blunt face. It was a voice that didn't even have a trace of hesitation and also made him flinch. Was it really not it? Honestly speaking, Anderson thought that the broadcast wasn't entirely made up. Although he didn't see it personally, the relationship they had seemed to be quite deep. It felt too excessive to just call her a friend. But despite that, Jo Minjun's attitude was too clean. Joanne that was next to them laughed and said. If he says so then it should. Anderson, don't ask too much. This is not something to be solved with the people around them overthinking things. Because you make us seem like that, it became like this. And also for the broadcast. It's turned around, Minjun. It didn't become like this because of us, but because you act like that we react like we do. Jo Minjun thought about what he should reply and then changed subjects. Let's talk about that awkward love line you say later, and first let's look the truck. As he talked like that and moved his steps first, his teammates grinned and followed his back. The food truck was as wide as it appeared to be from the outside. Jo Minjun looked the inside of the truck feeling flustered as if he was someone who had moved away. It was in a state where there were no cooking tools yet. Because Tel couldn't put in the tools before even knowing what you were going to cook. Jo Minjun said while sitting in a chair that was on the side of a wall. It's wider than I have thought. It has to be this much to be able to cook or do something. So, what should we make? I wonder. Sandwich. Is it too ordinary? It's a good choice being ordinary. But we have to think about the theme of the mission. In the end, we have to do business that makes the most money. I think that it would be somewhat lacking with just sandwich. At Anderson's pointing, Jo Minjun fell in his thoughts without saying anything. First, there were two paths: cheap and a lot, or expensive and a little. But thinking that people that come to the food truck aren't expecting a luxurious meal, he thought that it would be better to go with the former one. Let's go with the not expensive one. I think that $5 would be good. And we have to go with just one thing. Based on what he remembered, the team that had won was Anderson's. But he also thought that it was Kaya's. Because they were on the same team. And the menu. Was it Spanish omelette? No, it seemed to be another thing. Even though it was a program that rehashed a lot, he couldn't help but remember the team missions in a cloudy way. Because, what he remembered was basically the menus that had a story behind them. Actually, it wasn't right to act based on the future. Because the teams were different from then. Now he had to design a menu according to the teammates he was with. It was at that moment. Peter, that was aware of his surroundings, opened his mouth casually. What about steak? If you are talking about cow, it would be difficult. The costs doesn't match. Because there aren't going to be people that would want to pay tens of dollars to eat. Wouldn't using chicken breast be okay? Accompanying along with salad. It's not bad. But it's a bit lacking. Joe Minjun kept touching his chin that wasn't even bearded. Joanne snorted with a HM noise and opened her mouth. First, what gets into your mind when you think about food trucks? Kebab, takoyaki, hot dog, hamburger, sandwich, There's also chicken and pizza. But honestly, I think that these two won't have much competition. Because you can ask for pizza to deliver it to you. And I don't think that they would have a reason to go and look for a food truck. So do we have to pick from the options? I said. There aren't more. Let's think a bit more. There was no need to decide it immediately. Because that day was given as preparations, and the business started the day after. Ivana, that was absent-minded and her mouth shut, opened her mouth. She, who had short brown curly hair and freckles, talked so little it made you wonder if she was a mute. Shaved ice. Gelato. I like them. It's April. In the east, winter's climate didn't pass yet. It's still early for the people to want to eat something cold. Even if it's cold, ice cream is still delicious. Although it is delicious, it's a bit burdensome. I think that it would be better to evade cold food. Ivana put again an absent-minded face and looked down at the floor. Anderson said. Ice cream would be difficult just like you say, but I think that there should be a drink accompanied with the food. A non-alcoholic cocktail or squeezed fresh juice, or even tea would be okay. Depending on the food, the drink would also change. It was at that moment. Joe Minjun thought of one food in his head. A really familiar one for him, but a strange for them. Joe Minjun opened his mouth after hesitating a bit. How about kimbap? Kimbap. What's that? You place rice on top of laver, and also place other ingredients and roll it. Oh. Isn't that sushi? If you order sushi in a Japanese restaurant, you see them a lot. Yes. That. Norimaki. If you take out vinegar and sugar in that and apply some sesame oil, you can look at it as kimbap. It's almost the same. He felt somewhat regretful that they didn't know about kimbap, but nothing could be done. Because it was to the point that he seemed it funny that they couldn't even distinguish about kimbap and sushi. Joe Minjun thought for a little and continued speaking. Norimaki. On the side of the costs, I think that there would be nothing better than it. What do you think? Joanne. Do you know what this is? Yes. I ate it quite a bit because I like Japanese cuisine very much. It's simple and easy to sell, I think that it's not a bad idea. You can also make it beforehand, and it's an unfamiliar flavor. I don't know if the people will feel it to be unfamiliar, but nowadays there is no one who didn't try sushi. What about you? Joanne looked at Ivana. Ivana rolled her eyes slowly and then nodded. I think it's going to be fine. You know what kind of food it is, right? Yes. My friend is Japanese. Peter, what about you? I haven't tried it. I don't like fish that much. This isn't sushi that contains fish. It's made with rice, laver and other ingredients. It's really fine for me. Because it's easy to sell after you have prepared it. Joe Minjun nodded. The biggest advantage of kimbap and sushi was that it didn't matter if it got cold. Because after preparing it for a bit, there was no way to act without control when the customers flocked. With just that, half of the disadvantages seemed to be solved. Anderson opened his mouth. So the main idea is already made. Yes. We will have to think about the tea to serve it with. Lemon tea, citron tea, green tea, black tea. It would be good if we prepare at least 3 kinds of teas and make the customers choose. We will have to go to the market for the recipe. Well, let's. Jo Min-jun turned his head. He looked at the empty space in the truck. First, let's choose the cookware. Kaya. Traitor. Ruin yourself. Night. While he was cleaning the cookware and checking them, a message came. Jo Min-jun laughed and looked at the screen. While he was thinking what to reply for her to feel angrier, he seen that he was being too childish and felt delighted in vain. Joanne laughed wickedly. You are messaging again. Don't say again. It's the first time I received one. Look. Is it still the problem of our actions? You are making it look like that. I wonder. Just messaging is a dubious situation. Look. We aren't messaging with the other teams right now. And it's the same for you. Did you message someone else that's not Kaya? No, it isn't even that kind of message. Look, screen. Traitor. Ruin yourself. There's no romance at all. Romance is seen differently by each person. In my eyes, it looks like you are midway. Joanne put a detestable face and just clapped with her palms while her wrists were stiffed. Jo Min-jun shook his head as if he was exhausted. Just finish cleaning the fryer. There's dirt in it. Do you want to keep idling around? You just act strictly in these kind of situations. I won't even be able to tease you because you are afraid. You talk like teasing me is an obvious right. Humph, leave it. Joanne turned her head while pouting her lips and cleaned the fryer more harshly. It was at that moment when Jo Min-jun let out a sigh and was turning his head. An ah along with silence was heard. It was Peter. He was looking down at his hands while frowning. Jo Min-jun put back his scrubbing brush and hurriedly went to Peter. What is it, Peter? Are you hurt? No. Just a little bit. Give me your hand. Peter let out a sigh and extended his hand. Jo Min-jun's face became serious. The injury in his palm was quite deep. It wasn't as deep as the injury in Jo Min-jun's thumb, but it was 3 times longer than it. Hey, it's not just a bit. What are you doing without going to the doctor quickly? No. I will bring him. Wait, after we ignored him, he hurriedly went to the steps and looked for a doctor. The doctor looked at Jo Min-jun with a dumbfounded face. Why are you looking for me? Did the injury open? No. It's not me, but my teammate that got hurt. It's a knife cut. Oh my. Understood. Wait a little. The doctor hurriedly brought the medical tools. As he went to Peter, he was holding his wrist strongly as if trying to control the hemorrhage. However, his palm was already full of blood. While the doctor was treating him, Peter kept looking dispiritedly at the floor. Jo Min-jun felt rather bad looking at his face. He didn't seem to be simply putting that face because of the injury. After Peter got his hand treated and was resting, the checking of the cookingware finished. Jo Min-jun looked outside the truck. And he saw Peter seated absent-mindedly. Even though he sat next to him, he didn't look back at him. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth because he was feeling frustrated. Why are you this dispirited? What are you talking about? Even listening to your voice you are buried deep in the earth. If by chance it's because of what happened that time, don't mind it. Because I don't. It's something that passed. You can make some mistakes while cooking. I'm not like this because of that. Even if it is or not, in the end you admitted it. That you are dispirited right now. Peter bit his lips. Just like the majority of Indians, he also had a stubborn face. So he rather detested his face that wasn't saying anything. Jo Min-jun grabbed his forehead and said. What is it? I need to know your problem for being your team leader. Are you really not planning to talk? Peter opened his mouth, but closed it again. He let out a sigh with an exhausted face, and kept his mouth shut for a long while. And then, opened his mouth and said with a suffering voice. I'm thinking about what am I doing right now right here. If the scene where Kaya and I fight gets broadcasted, I would become a bastard and will get thousands of ill comments. And there would not be any restaurant that's going to recruit that kind of chef. And most of all, I don't have the confidence to be able to do something here. It's not only here, but wherever I go. Because I'm a guy that only knows how to make trouble just like that day. Jo Min-jun didn't say anything. It wasn't that he didn't feel sympathy for him. Nor wasn't frustrated. In the first place, he didn't have that deep of a relation with him. However, for him to talk about what he was feeling to someone he wasn't close to meant that he was suffering a lot right now. That's why he said, even if I console you right now, those words would just be for this kind of situation. Those words wouldn't even be meant for you, and because I want to become a good person. If you want to hear to these words, I can tell them to you. Do you want to? If you talk like that, would there be someone that says that he wants to? I asked because I knew you wouldn't want. I don't want to console you. And I'm not thinking to. Don't misunderstand. Because I'm not particularly thinking bad about you. I don't know about Kaya, but I ended everything that day with what I said. Jo Min-jun took a breath for a moment. The sun was setting. His face was red, similar to the sunset. Maybe because he was reflected to it, or his pressure was up. I like cooking. And because I do, I came all the way here. I want to take my first step properly in this world. That's why right now I'm happier than ever. But what about you? You also came. It means that you liked cooking. But why are you leaving a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and talking about confidence or ill comments? Right. I understand. Image, it would get bad. Because Martin isn't the kind of person to edit that. But if you were going to worry about that, in the first place, you shouldn't have committed that accident. I didn't do it because I wanted to. Yeah. I don't have a social life. Because of my temperament, I got bullied in school, and there was no one I could call as friend. It's the same here. I'm a loner. Everyone I have met didn't like me. And now, through the TV, all the people around the world got to know of me. And they will also hate me. Do you get it? Not only the Americans, but the whole world will hate me. What about that? Jo Min-jun talked while twitching his eyes. Peter glared at him as if he was angry, but he only bit his lips. Jo Min-jun continued talking with a sharp voice. What if they hate you? Just because they hate you, do you want to live as a villain like they want? I will say it honestly. I don't understand your place. Because I didn't live nor thought like you. However, if I were you, I would fight. Not with fists, but with cooking. Even if they hate me, I will make them not able to hate my cooking. Because that's what I can do. And you? What are you going to do? Because everyone hates you, and don't have any friends, you will give up. Do it. I won't hold you back. Peter was putting a face like he was going to cry at any moment. But he wasn't doing so because of his pride. Was he 24? He was in a young age. However, just like Peter's age, he had a childish mentality. Jo Min-jun let out a sigh. If you are not able to give up, don't sulk. I won't tell you to not mind the ill comments. Because even I'm not able to do so. However, just because of that, don't try to also give up your dreams. You survived until now. Just like you said, even if you lack sociability, at least it doesn't mean that you don't know how to cook. But of course, that day you made a little bit of a mistake. Jo Min-jun smirked and slapped his back. Jo Min-jun touched his back as if he was surprised and soon started to look at his feet while laughing faintly. Silence roamed for a while, and while the sun was setting and the dark night was approaching, Peter opened his voice with an insecure voice. Will I be able to? You can if you try. Don't know about that. Winning. Will I also be able to win? No, Peter looked at him absent-mindedly at the unexpectedly poured cold water. Jo Min-jun said in a blunt voice. Victory is mine. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 2, End Translator. Subak Proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 57. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 3, You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 3, Honestly, he didn't feel particularly attached to Korean cuisine. And he had many reasons. The food his mother made wasn't delicious, and there weren't any good restaurants near his house. But it would be different if he ate in a luxurious Korean cuisine restaurant. Now that he looked, the Korean meals he could try were all salty, sweet or spicy. What suited his tastes was the myeokguk or bibimbap he made in the past mission. He also liked not seasoned plain white kimchi. Modern people followed stimulation. And Korea wasn't exempted from that. It was hard to search for a restaurant that didn't write a message, and even if they didn't, they had to use provocative ingredients to compensate for that lack. There were stores that attained success through a plain and simple flavor like Pyongyang Naengmyeon, but how many people that weren't Epicureans thought that it was delicious? With that meaning, kimbap was a wonderful dish. The seasoning wasn't excessive and the flavor was simple. But even so, people liked it, and if you didn't put in weird ingredients in it, anyone could make it to be delicious. And that's why Jo Min-jun could recommend kimbap to his teammates. But of course, what they were thinking about was norimaki. But with the point that they immediately thought of norimaki like that, Jo Min-jun could get a certain amount of assurement in this item. Because when he actually ate kimbap before participating in Grand Chef, was in a sushi store he saw by coincidence. When he got in the restaurant wanting to eat sushi, he got surprised at the place full of customers. And he was also surprised that rather than normal sushi, kimbap sushi and norimaki were occupying almost all of the place of the displaying stand. He had known that white people didn't like labor that much, but Asians didn't even number half of the customers. He could say that sushi, and the variety of it, norimaki had already succeeded in the world. That's why he felt his heart getting lighter while making kimbap in front of his teammates. It didn't matter what you put in the kimbap. Because everyone agreed with norimaki. And the given concept seemed to have been decided. What he gave them was normal Korean kimbap. Cucumber, pickled radish, eggs, carrot, ham and burdock root. He used canned ham for the ham, but it wasn't really a problem. Because it didn't mean that he would present the dish just like that, but it was to teach them the characteristics of Korean kimbap. Anderson chewed a few times and frowned. What oil you said was applied? Sesame oil. The aroma of the oil is too strong. I think that it would be better to put in less or to use another oil. I like the point that there's no vinegar or kelp water in it. Because only the fresh flavor of the rice remains, I get the feeling that it suits well with the other ingredients. But I think that we have to prioritize not making the rice smell bad. Doesn't the labor smell bad? I wouldn't know if I ate it alone, but if I eat it with rice it's good. I don't smell fish that much. I'm just speaking objectively. There's nothing to point out about the combination of the ingredients it contains. At least, it felt good inside my mouth. At Anderson's words, Jo Min-jun barely took breath again. Seaweed wasn't that familiar to Westerners, but norimaki was a success. And the reason of that was because the vinegar and kelp water that was in the rice caught the bad smell of the labor. He started to worry because in Korean kimbap, there was no vinegar or kelp water to catch the bad smell. Could it be because of the sesame oil? I don't know. I will have to compare later. Why don't you try it yourself if you have an absolute sense of taste? Well, originally it's difficult to know about your own dish. There's not much in absolute taste. Anderson smirked. Joanne looked at the separately made kimbaps and opened her mouth. What were the ingredients for these? Cabbage, hamburger, sea urchins, eggs, tuna, fried shrimp with avocado, smoked salmon, vegetables and assorted eggs, and I ate the else. What were they? I think that there were more kinds. Ah, Minjun. You're that. It's so hard because there are a lot. Anyways, that Korean norimaki too. The one with tandoori chicken, pork barbecue, and the normal kimbap I just made. And Korean norimaki. We can just write in the menu as Korean norimaki. First, we should mix sesame oil with olive oil, or just use olive oil. And I think that it would be good to serve in thin slices, just like you ate before. Let's not do that and instead let's slice norimaki in a 1-inch size, and leave aside normal norimaki the size of a finger. How about it? I thought that the slices you cut were really comfortable to eat. I think that it would also vary depending on the person. That's fine. But I think that it would be good to prepare the 1-inch sizes beforehand. I think that people will mostly prefer that. Because they are accustomed to it. As he talked like that and ate the avocado and smoked tuna kimbap, he felt the oily flavor of the avocado, the salty tuna, and aside of that the aroma of chili. It was a spicy flavor that felt good. He felt the tip of his nose get chilly and he opened his eyes while frowning like a person who had eaten something acid. It was delicious. The cooking score was 6, but it couldn't be helped. Because he had put in smoked tuna, avocado and chili and just rolled it. Perhaps, getting a 6 was really an outstanding thing. Who made this? Me. The one who had replied was Anderson. Joe Minjun opened his eyes really big as if he was surprised. It's really delicious. First, the salmon got smoked so softly. Of course. Who made it? It wasn't tasty for me. Peter said bluntly. Anderson's eyes became sharper. Peter hurriedly shook his hands and said. It's not that your cooking was strange. I just keep feeling the flavor of the laver in the tip of my tongue. Is this a must? I think that it shouldn't be a problem for the laver to be there. There's something similar. It's called rice sandwich. But do you not like it that much? It's just that I'm unfamiliar to it. I think that there would be few customers like me, so wouldn't it be better to put in a few dishes in the menu with no laver in it? That rice sandwich you said for example. Peter's words were quite appropriate. It was at that moment when Joe Minjun tried to seriously think about his proposal. Anderson shook his head and said. There's no restaurant that satisfies all of your demands. If not, would they be selling beef? Indians don't eat it. And even more so in a small place like a food truck. You just have to sell what you have to. And if it wasn't a moving transport, but a restaurant, your words would be correct. Because if there are people that say that they just can't tolerate labor, they would just leave. But this is a food truck. There's no need to concern yourself. Anderson's words seemed quite right. Joanne opened her mouth admiring him. You thought of all of that in this short while. Aren't you rather intelligent? I grew in a chef's house. This much is common knowledge. And it's also true that I am intelligent. And just like intelligent people, you all seem to suck. At Joanne's words, Anderson snorted a humph and said. Even so there are really few people that haven't tried norimaki in the world. I think that it would be better to write as norimaki sushi rather than norimaki. Because there are quite a few people that first eat if it says that it's sushi. Those are some convincing words. Joanne opened her mouth. She raised her handphone and showed the community she was doing. If we announce that we are going somewhere, shouldn't viewers come like a flock? And if we also say that Minjun is the team leader and also that the norimaki is the main menu, many people will come to find us. Because norimaki made by an Asian team leader and norimaki made by a Westerner is a different nuance. And Minjun also has a lot of fans. I have a lot of fans. It's a first listening to that. Joanne laughed and said with her mouth shape. Kaya. Joe Minjun let out a sigh and changed topics. I did hear that they were going to publicize in Grand Chef's main page. The first day we will certainly be able to sell everything out. But the problem is after that. As more bad comments are posted, less customers will come. What if there are people that post ill comments without even having eaten it? They won't disappear by worrying. Let it be. Anderson replied with a cold voice. Looking at him, Joe Minjun got the feeling that he was really from a chef's house. Perhaps, he would have already experienced the problems they were facing right now. Through his parents, he would have suffered just as much as he has shared happy times. What? Why are you looking at me like that? I picked you well, right? Anderson snorted. It would be the best decision you made in your life. Grand Chef's house was located in Illinois, Chicago. The rent-car company was also located inside of Chicago. However, during that time they couldn't properly feel Chicago's air. And they were sloppily eating their first Chicago's meal. Chicago pepperoni pizza. There was so much tomato and pepperoni you couldn't differentiate from each other that it was dyeing the pizza red, and on top of the finger-sized dough, there were a lot of toppings in it. Joe Minjun was slowly slicing the pizza in pieces so thick it was hard to put it in his mouth. The flavor of the cheese was strong, but the sticky and thick dough covered that flavor. It was a rather harmonious dish. However, Anderson frowned. It's good that there's a lot, but you have to be able to eat it. Can they give you something you can't even fit in your mouth? Why? It doesn't matter much if you slice it. Real pizza is eaten with your hands. In these aspects Anderson was really picky and rather intimate. Ivana asked while chewing the pizza. Minjun, what score is the pizza? Can you stop asking me the score? I'm not scoring the food, but the cooking process. So wouldn't that be able to evaluate the food itself? That's relative. It's difficult for an objective evaluation. So I'm feeling how complex was the flavor made, and how well it was cooked. So what score is it? In conclusion, they wanted him to tell the score. Joe Minjun replied after gulping the pizza in his mouth. 7 points. The dough was really well done. Just like the place that sells the best in this town. I thought it would be an 8. Just like I told you, the flavor isn't a 7. Because you don't have to only cook in a high level to make a high level food. The norimaki we are making right now is just like that. Compared to the normal cooking method, the flavor is quite stable. And that was the biggest reason he proposed making norimaki. And at the same time, the reason why his teammates accepted it so well. You could make a wide varieties of menus simply, and at the same time the combination of flavor and rice gave them a sense of secureness. But the biggest advantage was that it had all the points a food truck required. Variability, cost and capital. The ingredients to make norimaki didn't even cost $1. However, the normal price was around $2 to $3. And also, taking into account the small size and that you could store it in the truck, the expectation towards it was quite high. The time was almost past 9. Joe Minjun opened his mouth. Let's eat quickly and prepare. We need to at least open at 11:30. Norimaki wasn't a snack but a meal. If they missed lunch time, the repercussions could be as big. Joe Minjun stood first from the place and checked at his handphone. There were a lot of comments about Grand Chef's food truck in the internet. It seemed to have attracted the attention of at least 1,000, or even 10,000s of people. Of course, there wouldn't be that much who lived in Chicago among them. The breed of the rice was koshihikari. Compared to Korean rice, koshihikari wasn't much better. Chinese rice wasn't bad to use in making kimbap or norimaki. He didn't put other rices. He didn't know how healthy was mixing other rices, but the flavor was totally disgusting. Especially if he was going to use it for norimaki, there was nothing else to say. People who come to the food truck look for flavor, not the well-being. The iron pot was a 150 people use. One line of norimaki used up 3 spoons of rice. So sufficient amount they could make was at least 300 lines. Also if the rice was cooked in 20 or 30 minutes, he didn't have to be that burdened about rice as he had thought. After Jo Min-jun put the rice, he checked the ingredients and etc. They were all fresh. His other teammates also stood up from the place and started to do their share of work. Peter too, was taking out the tandoori chickens he was storing in the fridge. It wasn't a method where they made their own menus. They got in charge of one menu each, and when they were free they had to move according to the situation. What Jo Min-jun grabbed first was the hamburger. It was a recipe he had proposed, as a Korean norimaki that seemed like kimbap. The first time he came to New York, the flavor of the hamburger steak he tried in Lucas's house was still fresh. That strong aroma, and the texture and pepper he felt through his teeth. It had the most American flavor from all the things he tried. But of course, it was difficult to imitate that. If he had to roll it in kimbap, he had to slice it thinly. And because of that, Jo Min-jun focused more on flavor than texture. When the exterior of the hamburger got yellow, he boiled it down in soy sauce, mirin, and lemon. Actually, it was a really popular Japanese cooking method. The atmosphere in the kitchen was basically calm. Rather than the teammates were calm, Jo Min-jun was like that. He didn't like to raise his voice without any reason. If he had something to say, he said in a voice that could be heard sufficiently, and even if he was in an urgent situation, he didn't yell. Was it because of that? Time passed really quickly. Soon, it was past 11 o'clock, and the fryers and frying pans were all stopped. What they were doing seemed to be at all. Rolling the norimaki kimbap. And they had to cool it for a moment. Although in Korea, eating kimbap cold or hot didn't matter much, norimaki was a food that was basically eaten cold. Anderson. Check the situation of the tea. After rolling this, there were 3 kinds of teas. Ginger tea, green tea and lemon tea. Anderson checked the boiling pot and said, "It's perfect. We just have to serve it. The kimbap is also finished." Jo Min-jun spoke after finishing rolling the last smoked salmon norimaki. The team members looked at Jo Min-jun. He felt sound of his heart beating and extended his hand. "Let's go. We will just eat this mission whole." "That's good, but must we do this?" Anderson placed his hand on top of his and grumbled. 5 hands gathered and a loud yell was heard. Jo Min-jun opened the back door of the truck and went outside. And at that moment, he froze on that place. "Ha, it's Min-jun." There were no cheers. Just voices talking among themselves. But as countless voices were combined, he couldn't help but hear it as they were yelling. Bedodem, the customers were lined up. So long he couldn't even count them. Traveling, cooking and business, 3, End translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 58. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 4, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. Traveling, Cooking and Business, 4, he thought that feeling overwhelmed was something like this. Looking at the many colorful clothes, and the people from various cultures he felt happy and scared at the same time. The youngest PD approached and opened his mouth. "Are you going to open now?" "Yes." The PD nodded and returned with the staff. Martin wasn't there. Just like the participants split in 3, the staff also had to split in 3. And Martin was in charge of Chloe's team. As he opened the side door of the truck, the team members that were preparing to take orders looked outside dumbfoundedly. Jo Min-jun understood them. Although Grand Chef had an influence in it, he had never thought that this amount of customers would come. Jo Min-jun got inside the truck and opened his mouth. "How should we do this?" 2 does the calculations and the remaining 3 keeps making some more. Making the rice lasts 30 minutes, What ingredients are left? We are out of beef. And there are only a few of avocados. Then we are excluding hamburger and tuna avocado. We will have to use the rice we were going to use tonight. What about the other things? There's some roasted tandoori chicken left, would this be okay? Norimaki is eaten cold, but even so, if time passes more than it should, I think that it would start to feel bad. But let's keep looking. There's not even stored ingredients. Yeah. We used it all. I will first wash the rice. You keep taking on the orders. It wasn't the time to be losing time. The four were standing in front of the displaying stand and wrapping the order and serving it. The one who was taking the orders and the money was Joanne. Honestly speaking, the remaining three didn't have a temperament to take the orders of the customers easily. Anderson was mean, Ivana was absent-minded, and Peter was just him. Excluding Joanne, Jo Min-jun could also serve the customers, but the one who washed rice the best was Jo Min-jun. And the process that took the longest on making norimaki was cooking the rice. He had to prepare it beforehand. He hesitated on the amount, but for now he decided to make for 100 people. He had to fill 2 of the 3 rice cookers. Maybe more customers would come, but in the case that they stopped coming, he had to compensate the losses. He could use the remaining rice that night, but honestly he didn't really like that. Because rice cooked on the moment, and rice after 5 hours had a clear difference between them. Even if he stored it well, the flavor could only fall. The customers that came looking Grand Chef should be around half of them. He didn't want to disappoint them. Of course, with the minimal condition of the rice, it wouldn't vary too much for them, but it was the heart of a chef to want to give them a dish that was at least a little bit better. Min-jun, if you are done, take the counter. I am done, but why the counter? I want to prepare some pork barbecue. And Joanne whispered in his ear as if she was telling him a very important secret. People want you. You are a popular star. If you thought of making me embarrassed, you succeeded doing so, Noel.n to be a popular star. He didn't know why that word made him get goosebumps. Jo Min-jun frowned, and soon put in a faint smile and approached the counter. As he stood in front of the counter, the first customer he saw was an Asian girl. She had her mouth so wide it seemed about to rip, and was putting a flustered smile. Hello. I'm your fan. Thank you. You are Korean. Yes. I just heard that you were doing food truck business around here, so I immediately came with my car. The girl was talking in Korean. Now that he thought about it, it had been a really long while since he had talked and met a Korean. Feeling her exquisite perfume, he smiled and said, "What's your order?" 1 tuna avocado and 1 Korean style. 2 lines will fill me, right? If you are not a heavy eater. It will be $4.5 together. Here. Win please. I will cheer for you. Jo Min-jun smiled instead of replying. She was not the only one asking about other things rather than the bill. Of course, there were many people that were cautious while asking, but even they asked him while he was putting the money and taking out some in the counter. And the question that occupied the most amount of percentage was obviously, say honestly. What's your relationship with Kaya? It was that kind of question. At first he said that he was nothing with her, but the ones listening to him didn't seem to believe him at all. Well, even the other participants didn't believe him. But because of that, he couldn't say what they wanted to listen to. Because truth was truth. Jo Min-jun just thought that they were just friends, or at most a kind of brother and sister. Excluding the questions about Kaya, there were also good words among them. I saw well you're cooking. I ask for a good dish. Are you confident on winning? He replied appropriately to all of them, but it also took its own toll. In average, 2 or 3 people in 1 minute. And they would mostly buy 2 lines each, so after half an hour passed there were at least half of the norimakis from the 300. The first one that sold out was obviously the pork barbecue. It was well known from old times the love of pork barbecue from Americans. And likewise, the second thing sold out was the hamburger. In the other hand, the least selling one was an unexpected menu. And Jo Min-jun thought that it would be the Korean norimaki, kimbap. Of course, there were many kinds of norimaki that were filled up just like Korean kimbap, but they had named it as Korean. So he thought that it would be quite risky because of that. But of course kimbap didn't do that bad. It was behind the second place. And the last one was urchin's egg. Just when he had designed the menu, he thought that it wouldn't get good results. It seemed like urchin egg was lacking fascination for Americans. But they were fortunate to not have made as much as the other menus. The rice should be almost done. Joanne. If you are done with the barbecue, come here to the counter. Wait a moment. Give me a minute. Joanne replied without even turning back because she was really busy. The norimakis kept decreasing, but the lines were still really long. But compared to the start, it was affordable, but if you thought that the lines would keep increasing, 30 minutes would be the limit with the norimakis they had right now. Done. Let's change. Joanne approached him and opened her mouth. Jo Min-jun finished what he was doing and went back to the rice cooker. The rice was well done. Because he washed it more than usual, it didn't smell bad at all, and each grain of rice had a beautiful shape. It was so well done that he unconsciously smiled. Anderson. Are the fried shrimps and carriage done? I put it on the sieve. You can immediately use them when the oil is removed. Anderson wasn't wrapping the norimaki from the start, but preparing the fillings. And it wasn't excessive for him. Because one person was in charge of taking the orders, if they were only busy with no time to rest, it was an affordable pace. Should we get one more person in the counter for tonight? It was hard. If it was like that, the remaining 3 would all have to concentrate on wrapping it. If he thought about adding help like just now, it was good that only one person was in charge of the counter. But of course, the speed the line reduces would decrease. Should I change the selling method? It was a problem he didn't have to think about right now. Jo Min-jun poured vinegar and keep water in the rice and carefully rubbed it. The rice need to crumble the least amount possible to keep the clean flavor. After that it was simple. Spreading rice in the laver, and rolling after filling it up. The kinds were each pork barbecue, carriage, and fried shrimp. From the remaining ingredients they had, these were the best-selling menus. And they made twice the amount of pork barbecue this time. As Jo Min-jun and Anderson wanted to roll all of those norimakis, it took quite a toll. The muscles in their arms stretched tightly, and the bent neck kept getting harder. This is the tough part of the restaurant. As it is a restaurant with better quality menus, there were many cases where you had to keep repeating things without cutting the flow. Just when Jo Min-jun was working as the youngest chef in a luxurious restaurant, the scene he saw was similar. He had to keep cutting the vegetables consistently. And that's why Jo Min-jun was rather delighted of this exhaustion. Because it was exhaustion originated from cooking, and not by preparing. It was his cooking. Their cookings. He could hold the knife, hold the pan, and make the customers smile. Just with that, his maid became warmer. Anderson sticked out his tongue and said, "Let's rest for a bit. Anyways, there's no need to roll this immediately. Let's do it resting for bits. The speed we roll it should be faster than the speed it gets sold. Rest for a bit. I will do a bit more. If the team leader acts like this, am I able to stop?" Anderson grumbled and kept rolling the norimaki. Jo Min-jun looked at him and laughed without him noticing. It was temporary, but it was still their restaurant. He had customers, and also good comrades. If he could someday be in this situation on the restaurant, he would have someday. I thought I was going to die. Me too. Talking is also hard right now. At Ivana's absent-minded voice, Joanne sighed and agreed. They worked for a little more than 2.5 hours. And they sold all of the Norimakis without leaving a single line. But of course, in the case of Urchin Eggs, they bought it because there was nothing else to buy. Because it sold out only after the newly added barbecue, carriage and etc. were also sold out. Jo Minjun smirked. Want to know something funny? Looking that you are smiling, it doesn't seem to be something fun. But first, talk. After half an hour we have to start again. Joanne stared at him without saying anything. Ivana also looked at him with a dour face next to her. Anderson let out a sigh. I did help my parents in their store, but this seems much more exhausting than that. Standing still was also work. No, I think that standing was the harshest work. How can it be that it hurts more than my arms and legs that were moving? Lean your heads back. Because in a while you won't even have the time to loosen up your neck muscles. At Jo Minjun's words, the four of them leaned their heads back at the same time, as if they had agreed beforehand. It was really fortunate that there was a camera installed. Because it was such a funny scene that if they missed it, it would be really regrettable. Jo Minjun massaged his nape and opened his mouth. I'm curious as to what the other guys did. If they too had as much people as us, they wouldn't have been able to properly shorten the line. Because such a simple thing like Norimaki is this much of a pain. Oh, thinking about it. About now. Wait a minute. Joanne raised her handphone. At that moment, the other four all guessed what she was going to do. There would also be customers in the other team's trucks, and they wouldn't just be silent. So the menu couldn't be helped but to leak out. Joanne looked at the screen for a long while. Peter, that was feeling stuffy, couldn't hold it any more and asked. What? What is it? Tell us quickly. Wait a moment. I'm reading right now. First, Hugo's team is cake and coffee. It seems like they caught the concept of a coffee truck. And Chloe's team seems to have made kochi or sandwich. But the problem isn't that. They say that they fought. Did Kaya make trouble? Jo Minjun's face got serious. However, Joanne shook her head. She looked at the screen as if she couldn't believe it and frowned. No. Chloe. Traveling, cooking and business, 4, N translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 59. Customer and more customers, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 59. Customer and more customers, 1, at that moment, the expression Joanne was putting spread in everyone's faces like it was contagious. They couldn't help it. Because in the past month, they had never seen Chloe getting angry. But that Chloe got angry. Jo Minjun opened his mouth with a perplexed voice. How surprised was he that his voice shook at the end. Saying that she had a fight, who was it with? Her teammates. Or the customers. It seems like it's the customers. You two take a look. At her words, they realized that they also had their own handphones. Jo Minjun looked at the mentions in the screen without a word. Ellie Dean. They say that there was a scandal in Grand Chef's food truck. They say that a customer and Chloe fought as they were shouting. CRJ. I was in that place, but Chloe wasn't to the point to be shouting. It is true that she had raised her voice, but compared to the customer it was nothing. Ellie Dean. At CRJY. What did she do? CRJ. At Ellie Dean I don't know why they started to fight, but I heard the people talking at that time. First, if she was planning to take the money selling this kind of trashy kochi. But the funny thing was that Chloe didn't even get the money. So it means that that person hadn't even eaten a bite. Samantha Croft. It wasn't a good scene to look at. I know that it isn't easy to cope with that, but Chloe had to bear with it. Rihanna Pratchett. A situation where you just can't hold it also exists. You can easily say that you have to bear with it in any kind of trouble because you weren't in that situation yourself. Samantha Croft. Now that you say that I'm saying it easily, I have nothing to talk back. But reality is like that. Even if it's hard and exhausting, if you have consideration towards the customer, you shouldn't have made it bigger as to make it a fight. There were no comments that explained the situation in detail, but the conclusion was only one. That Chloe fought with a customer. But the reason of that wasn't written. Well, a quarrel had happened when they were conversing among themselves near the counter. So it was hard for the people near to know the reason of it. They wanted to message what was wrong, but in this kind of situation she wouldn't take any kind of consoling that well. Anderson said with a dry voice. That person should have been a considerable jerk. Because Chloe isn't the type to get angry easily. It's amazing that from your mouth comes out words cursing someone like that. I don't think that I was the type to like bad-mouthing people. That's not it, but I have never seen you complimenting someone. I didn't compliment. I just evaluated as it is. She's not the type to easily get angry. Anderson put his handphone on his pocket with a not too good face. Don't mind it too much. We will get through that at least once. Because the world is wide and there are a lot of jerks. When that happens, try not to end up like this. Because what they want is to roll together in a mud bath. And of course, the laundry after that mud bath will all be our responsibility. It seems as if he had gone through it a few times, but he had talked just like a veteran. Jo Min-jun clapped his hands in a not too noisy manner. Well, let's concentrate on our break. We are going to rest for an hour and a half, and after buying the ingredients, go back to cooking again. It's a bit past 2 right now. So let's rest until 3:30 and go prepare the ingredients immediately. But preparing the ingredients, there's no need for all 5 of us to go, right? Peter asked. Those were some unexpectedly true words. Peter looked cautiously and slowly opened his mouth. Should we do it with rock, paper, scissors? Have a safe trip. At the entrance of the market, Joanne smirked and shook her hands. Even if Anderson glared at her, it was useless. Jo Min-jun patted his shoulder and said. Let's go. There's no time. TCH. What, it's good. Because they chose to clean instead. It's almost the same. I don't like the market. Anderson said. Jo Min-jun looked at him as if it was something unexpected. Because the market could only be a place that was friendly to the chef. Aside from the needs, as there were more things in the market, it was a fun place like a video games room for the chef. Anderson looked at Jo Min-jun. The doubt in his eyes were so dense it made him not notice it. Anderson raised his finger and blocked his nose and lifted it. I didn't like the market since I was small. Because regardless of my opinion, I got dragged by my parents. Even so, isn't it time to change opinion? They say that a habit since small lasts all the life, so you can forever hate what you used to hate when you were small. Just tell me what we have to buy. What do we have to buy? You can roughly make 30 lines with 1 kilogram of rice. So let's abundantly buy 20 kilograms. Because customers can flock at night too. We already have chicken leg that's going to be used for tandoori chicken, so we will have to buy a bit more of chicken breast and avocado for carriage and some smoked salmon. No. Thinking about the tandoori we have to make tomorrow, we will have to buy some chicken leg beforehand. We decided to remove urchin egg in the menu so we don't have to buy it. We also have to buy the fillings for the kimbap and hamburger. Honestly, urchin egg was a menu that didn't sell much to keep it. Even after it got up on the internet, the comments about urchin egg norimaki weren't very good. On the other hand, kimbap had quite a bit of demand. Compared to the other norimakis, it didn't contain vinegar or kelp water, but there were quite some people that liked that clean flavor. Anderson brought the market cart and said. If we didn't have the cart, we wouldn't even have been able to bring all the ingredients. That's why I told you that 3 people had to come. Just do it, and if it's difficult we can just be 3 the next time. But aren't you accustomed to it? You said that you have done this many times helping your parents. Just because I'm accustomed to it doesn't mean that it's not hard. Those were words that were quite understandable. Because even when he was working in the restaurant as the youngest, getting accustomed to it and not being hard were two different things. Even so, we are fortunate that it's norimaki. Because the ingredients are simple. It's not that simple because there are a lot of menus. First, making rice a few times is really bothersome. I think that Chloe's team should have it easier. Because they just have to prepare the meat and the bread. I think that it would also quite the toll depending if they make the bread dough themselves or not. Anderson got in the butcher instead of replying. Joe Minjun was looking at his back without saying anything, and moved his feet. The place he headed to was a place where they pounded the rice themselves. Because the oxygenation started when you pounded rice. The more recent the rice was pounded, the more delicious it became, and he viewed well that he had to suffer time to time for the sake of the customers. I think that a few hours difference wouldn't make that much of a difference. Saying the truth, doing the groceries after a meal was quite a hard thing to do. In the first place, the team members all agreed at serving the customers with ingredients that were even a little bit more fresh, but maybe they thought that it was a stupid thought. We can fix it slowly. Joe Minjun thought like that and opened his mouth. Give me just 20 kilograms. You are quite diligent, also coming in the morning. You said that you were selling norimaki, right? Yes. We are doing so in the east side of the market. In a food truck. If I could leave the store, I would also go and eat, the owner who had black hair and glasses said in a disappointed voice. At first glance, this young Korean owner seemed to be in his 30s. Precisely speaking, he was Korean American. Just that he didn't know how to speak Korean. The owner didn't think himself to be Korean, but even so it seemed that he missed it quite a bit. At the same time, he seemed to be a fan of Grand Chef. The owner continued to speak. How do you feel after being in Korea for a while? You also ate the food of the other participants, right? How was it? It's different from time to time. I normally make not too seasoned food, so I make most of it salty, but it's still delicious. Well. A good chef can make good food anywhere and anyhow. Use my rice well. That guy spoke just like he was the farmer that had harvested that rice himself. But Joe Minjun didn't particularly point that out. It was at the moment when he was leaving the store. His hand phone rang. Joe Minjun held the rice sack with one hand and took out his handphone. He thought that it was going to be Anderson, but the name that showed on the screen was out of his expectations. Joe Minjun brought the handphone to his ear. Hello. What are you doing? I just brought rice and I'm returning right now. Why are buying rice now? Didn't you buy it in the morning? I wanted to use the least amount possible and buy just at times. Is it too excessive? Overly excessive. Is it? After that, they both remained silent for a moment. Rather than they didn't have any words to say, it seemed more like they were hesitating to bring that up. In the end, the one who talked first was Joe Minjun. Is it fine? What? The atmosphere of the team. They say that Chloe fought with a customer. No sound was heard through the phone. Joe Minjun didn't pressure her. Kaya said in a mortifying voice. It's because of me. That Chloe fought. Joe Minjun didn't get surprised. Because he thought that that was the case. Chloe wasn't the type to clash with the customer just because she got cursed. Especially if it was in the middle of a team mission, there was nothing else to say. Perhaps, if Chloe caused the problem, he thought that it wouldn't be for her sake, but for another one. And if that other person was Kaya, then not even a little bit of it would be strange. Rather, it was too simple. Because Kaya was usually the troublemaker. However, there was no need to say that with his own mouth. Joe Minjun didn't say anything and listened to her. A thick and rough voice. Her voice that seemed to have caught a cold, seemed harsher than usual. That guy looked at me and said that I seemed delicious. Well, even if his eyes were directed at me, perhaps he was talking about the Kochi. Wait. What? What did that bastard say? I told you that I seemed delic. No, stop it. There's no need to repeat that. So Chloe got angry at him. No. It's true that she got angry for my sake, but the story is a bit different. You know my temperament. I'm harsh and a little dirty. I'm not someone to just listen to that and keep my mouth shut. Jo Min-jun got confused. There were many mentions in the internet, but none of them were related to Kaya. However, it didn't take that long for him to know the reason of it. Jo Min-jun forced a laugh. Chloe didn't fight because she was angry. She was protecting you. Right. Kaya replied with a depressed voice. Because Chloe stepped out for her, the fight didn't get bigger than necessary. And the focus of attention also passed to Chloe. Perhaps, it could be better this way. Kaya's image and Chloe's image. There were huge differences between them. If Kaya acted like that in the same situation, there would be many people saying that they knew that she was going to act like that. However, it was different in Chloe's case. Because just the broadcasted material about her showed only good images of her. There could be a reason behind it. She was a person you could only think like that. But of course, the probabilities that Chloe calculated all of that in that short moment were low. Maybe she just wanted to protect Kaya. But what was certain was that she did want to protect her. By becoming the center of attention by herself. Why am I like this? Why do I only cause trouble? It's not your fault. Aside from being at fault or not, I just feel too sorry to look at her face. He understood her. How frustrated would she have been that the girl who was always grumbling, called him. Jo Min-jun couldn't open his mouth for a long while. He didn't know what he had to say. And in the end, the words he said, "We can pick our customers," was all. Kaya didn't reply. Only her faint breathing noise was heard like the wind. If you didn't choose, then you also have no responsibility nor fault. You are trying to console me with those straightforward words. So, you got consoled. I will cancel it. At Kaya's words, Jo Min-jun rolled up his eyes. He didn't understand what she was canceling. What are you canceling? You getting ruined. I'm canceling those words. I'm busy. I have to slowly start working. But you called for, Jo Min-jun stopped saying and looked at his screen. The call had already ended. Jo Min-jun looked at his handphone with a perplexed face, and soon mumbled with a bitter face. The customer, that word wasn't as sweet as he expected it. Customer and more customers, 1, end translator. Subak.